I'll go ahead and call the Wednesday, August 24th, 2022 Nottingham Planning Board meeting to order. I'll go around the room first to have everybody introduce themselves, starting with Ms.
Sandra
Jones.
Jones, alternate.
Buzz Davies, alternate.
Gary Anderson.
John Moran, Ian McKinnon.
Edward Veal.
Sherry Sandlin.
Charlene Anderson.
Larry Haney, SRPC.
And tonight is mostly a night for the planning board to get, just begin working on some subdivision regs and site plan updates, start discussion of potential things that might pertain to zoning for future meetings. But other than that, it's technically a non-business night, meaning we're not hearing any new cases, or continued cases tonight. So as such, there should be there likely won't be any votes taken tonight, but I will seat Mr. Davies, for Ms. Mooney tonight for any items like minutes, where a vote may occur. Thank you. All right, so the first item on the agenda, we'll just take it in order. Again, subdivision site plan regulation updates. I did find my list from last year that we worked on for items that was more of zoning related. Some of these we ticked off, but so like building height, we amended. Steep slopes ordinance, we didn't address last year. That would probably be a zoning change potential for later on this year. Driveway setback is on the agenda for tonight to discuss. A couple of housekeeping cleanups which are already done, and then the FEMA maps update if they're available, but I believe they have not been updated yet, adopted yet, so they're just working off the old FEMA maps. That's that. So we can just take it in order unless anybody has a specific item that they want to address first.
No, that makes sense.
Seeing none, the first item on there was road setbacks. Mr. Haney, did you come to find any like language or where any other towns that have a road setback and where it best applies? We probably have to put it in both the sub-regs and site plan.
Yeah, no, I did not. I had looked more on, I was more focused on the applications, and I did not. We did research last year, pull that up.
Yeah, so I know, in my review of some other towns to see what they had, a lot of them had like a 20-foot setback, some had further if it was, like a major road. And then the area in between the road and the property line was not allowed to be utilized for, was supposed to be kept vegetated as much as possible. Basically keep a better buffer between any new roadway and a, in an abutting residential lot. So I guess, unless there's, anybody has specific verbiage or an area where they think this would best apply, I guess I would be more interested tonight in figuring out what we think a proper distance is on that.
I guess my thought's always been, I know we've had some cases in the past, and it primarily comes into play if somebody's doing an open space subdivision and they're trying to, maybe place all the lots tight on one side roadway, and then we've seen where maybe a roadway is proposed where an existing property line is one side of the right of way and then the other side is a new line. I think it's, my first inclination for a number is if somebody has to go to that layout where the road is more focused to one side of a piece of developable property, you're generally looking for like 20 to 25 foot minimum, because that, if you look over that distance in general, that's where you're gonna have decent natural vegetation or be able to supplement. The tricky part there is with the open space, right, is they're always like, well, that would become part of open space ideally. It would wrap around whatever the layout is. Problem is now you're forcing a 25-foot strip for however long, and it can be a lot of land that's, somebody could argue that depending on the width of the lot, which is really on them. But
Yeah, so in the open space and zoning, it does discuss a buffer. Landscape buffer, open space development shall have a buffer of no less than 100 feet between abutting land uses and the
Right.
development to retain the community's rural character, shall remain free of buildings, and wherever possible, natural vegetation shall remain, not to be calculated as part of the open space, designated open space. But I believe they can, the applicant, this is one of those areas of conditional use permit, where they can request to, reduce or eliminate that buffer.
Yeah, and that's where, cause if that last line of that, if you can go up to part, what was it, part H? Part, G. The landscape buffer is not to be calculated as part of the designated open space.
Yep.
So, and that's where it gets tricky. I mean, ideally, you have a road with lots on either side, and then those lots are gonna be driven by the buffers, but where you see a lopsided design with road on one side, lots stacked on just one side of the road.
This also comes into play as if the frontage was shortened, I mean, the access to the back lot. Talking like, you know, if the frontage was only 50 feet or whatever.
Oh, for a backlot subdivision?
Or if there's an
Sorry, was
existing
that-
right of way, yeah,
We'll get it,
yeah.
you know, the distance is there, is that what, I mean,
I think what we've seen is, so if
trying
there,
to find the exact scenario, I mean, there's many scenarios with this topic.
Yeah.
So for people listening, trying to get it, you know, there was a Smoke Street development that still might be out there. There was a condition of where that road was gonna go in and against the neighbor's property line. Is that what we're talking about here?
that type of
Yes,
scenario.
we're talking about
That,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the scenario we're
yes,
talking
yeah.
about, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
New subdivision, so we, last year or the year before, we added a setback for driveways, you know, unless they're shared driveways, which would go on the boundary.
Right,
But
I know that.
non-shared driveways, we added some setback at least. But the bigger impact would be, you know, new roadways that can go in on a lot where, especially if they're going against a lot that, or a budding lot that is,
Right,
you know,
'cause they have to make the
pre-existing
turn or
non-conforming.
whatever like this, and they're gonna go
Now,
20 feet
sudden-
of it in that one spot, then it goes back out into the open. You wanna say, listen, we can only be X amount of distance from that existing lot. Because it's not part of the subdivision, that's somebody else's lot.
'Cause otherwise, you can in theory strip right up to their property line.
Right up to the property line,
Have the
right.
road pavement 10 feet off that.
Sure.
Depending on what the dimension.
Well, and that neighbor could strip the line, strip his property right to that driveway.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a buffer, he can take everything down he wants, cause he owns the
Right.
land. Then he could have potential access to a road.
And that's where like getting the
Second driveway.
the wording of this will be tricky, right? Because we already have a landscape buffer of 100 feet. Conditional use permit can modify any of the open space requirements, but I'm not sure where I mean, I don't know if it's modification of this landscape buffer, which unfortunately is in the zoning, but figure out how to put it in subdivision or site plan.
Yeah, and the reason we thought about putting it in the subdivision regs and site plan regs is because basically it's about a new road, which would mean a subdivision or a site plan coming in, as opposed to, amending the zoning to address it. So subdivision site plan allows us to kind of build in more control around it in a way for this board, you know, waivers, things like that. Which we would also probably want to address if we want waivers for certain things or not, but, so you, I guess that's one scenario, so we'd have to be mindful wherever we place this of how do we address it when, with backlots is one, you know, to make sure, but again, I guess that wouldn't be a new roadway, it'd be a driveway, so we shouldn't have an impact there.
Yeah, we should make sure that's clarified, way different.
Yeah, and then, but the, open space development would be the one area where I think it could come up. Is potentially a,
Well, that's where I'd put it.
yeah.
I was gonna suggest that 20 feet or less, for that reason, like Ian mentioned, you know, a swath of land coming down that side, 25 is a lot, can be a lot, and also because of the open space, unless we're gonna segregate open space from conventional, that's gonna be,
Right, you have to kind of think of it as what would you want for a conventional, because that's gonna be your kind of most visible development, widespread.
Or I guess possibly it doesn't need to be separate from the open space, because open space has a 100-foot buffer that's supposed to stay vegetated. They can request a conditional use permit to reduce that buffer. So if we put in a 25-foot setback for any new roadway, it would be from the property line. So in this case, it could be right on that. If they did hold true to the 100-foot buffer, it could be, from 100 to 125 feet would be, or whatever that right of way is, would be the road width with no buffer, cause no additional setback beyond.
So,
Cause it'd be from, the buffer, I'm sorry, the setback is usually from a property line, not from a buffer line.
so here's a question for you. When we say this, let's say 25 feet or 20 feet that we're talking about on the road, is that from where the pavement starts? Or is that from where we have the shoulder of the road? I mean, cause,
Either right away.
It's actual, it'd actually be like, yeah, it should be a lot line, so you'd literally have a piece of land between two lot lines, that's 25 feet. You'd hit that right of way line for the road, then have to go X number of feet to the shoulder, so depending on what
so
that
that's- right.
is, yeah.
that's why I'm just,
And that's why I think you could do 20 or 25 works. If you get 20, you might get more than that because of
sure, the extra stuff.
the
you guys
extra
are doing.
space past the right of way, so.
Right. Oh, I'm not opposed to
Yeah.
the 20 or 25. I think that's reasonable. I think 50 would be way too much. I wouldn't even be in the realm, but I'm not opposed at all to them 20 or 25.
Yeah.
You can, and that's where we could tier it, so maybe if it's, X number of houses, or if it's a cul-de-sac, it's, or something, it's 25, but if it's,
A smaller
Trying
one,
to think
there's
of like
only
a
5
major-
houses or 6 houses.
yeah, but if it's,
Yeah.
It's 25
20,
houses, right?
25 and above.
The road traffic's gonna be twice as much, and that's gonna be, especially with the neighbor there.
Right.
So, consideration for making it wider.
Is there any,
Can we legally
thought
do
to
that?
making a minimum distance from any existing building on the other lot? That really is, kind of the issue, right? Is like making sure that they,
Yeah, the problem is we have so many lots where somebody might be 200 feet, the building is 200 feet from the lot line of, that's of interest. But they might have field or a lawn, and kinda to your point, if they already maybe have some sort of space cleared up to the line, you don't wanna just see another, that open space widened, I guess. Cause I have seen that requirement before, like, keep the roads a certain distance from houses.
yeah, and maybe then there's a minimum, like with a minimum of 20 feet, set off the lot line or something like that, or 50 feet from the closest building.
Right.
Yeah,
The goal here is again to stick with our ordinances of the rural character. That's why we wanna keep the trees. We wanna keep the natural habitat for the deer, squirrels or whatever, roll through and have, I mean,
Yeah, and also just to protect, existing property owners and house lots and things like that, where
Yeah, good neighbor kind of thing.
it's basically to try to promote that harmonious growth, where it's, it's less impact on the
Trying to figure out where it would fall within just our general road design.
truck standard, there's, I think we had a.
Section 15 of the subdivision regs.
Yeah.
Road and driveway. I was just trying to see if there's somewhere we can just add a sentence to something. In the site plan, we have in the site plan regulations, we have a landscape section, so that's easier just to put an extra bullet point, but.
Where are we in the site plan right now?
Well, I'm looking at subdivision regs, but we're, like, section like 15 is where your roadway standards are.
Okay.
Or 15.2. And access 15.1, so it's gonna go somewhere in that section, I would think, and it'd be best to try to like call it out, so if we have a table to add it to or somewhere, but, so I guess I can work on kind of looking where it might best fit, and just deciding on, do we want to pick one distance and, go with it, or pick two, depending on, two or more, depending on site it is, site plan, meaning usually commercial development, or, how large of residential development it would be. Meaning the road is gonna probably be bigger and have different traffic.
Oh, you mean like a threshold of units, like to exceed?
I kinda like the idea of a tier, because that, you know, that I think is a larger development is, you know, just certainly go into kind of the, you know, if you have a house that the road's next to, I think it's just kind of a common courtesy and staying with the character of the town. I like that idea. And then I think, you know, I think about kind of I think too, just that will also help, protecting those houses that are along that Route 4 area, in which, you know, industrial road could come in next to, and making sure that there's a buffer for those residential areas around that. So I like that idea for those reasons.
I agree.
We'll probably end up seeing between this discussion and some further discussions about, like no cut, no disturbance buffers, and even get into discussion about setbacks, because right now, when you read our regs, it's not necessarily clear, most of the time when we talk about setbacks, it's to a building.
Right.
So we don't really discuss driveways, roadways, parking lots, for setbacks, so that's something where it's either leaving a lot of room for interpretation and potential changes, you know, different interpretations, and unclarity for, non-clarity for applicants, so that we can get into that later, but it's another area we'd wanna, keep in mind as to how that applies for, in other sections with that.
Yeah, I noted that too, and like the site plan is, I think we only have a requirement for a 10-foot wide buffer zone.
Right. Vegetation
this-
strip, yeah.
Right. I think by doing it a tiered way too, is it's easier to place a table sometimes than come up with another paragraph and try and make that, you know, I'd rather just throw data into a table, but I picture it as a minimum, whether we do 20 or 25. It's always nice to stick to 25s, 50s, 75s.
I agree.
You know,
What if-
that might be the minimum.
What if the property is such that the only practical place for the driveway is next to the property line? In other words, if there's wetlands, except for this one spot, and what about sight lines on the road?
Yeah.
So how do we put all that into this thing with buffers?
And I think that's where being in the subdivision site plan, it's a waiverable item.
Right, that'd be, a driveway would go to zoning. A road, I mean, would be totally different. If you were trying to put it on a property, and you were in that there, with the amount of frontage you need to put a road in.
That's design standards,
Yeah, that would be, have to redesign their whole, I mean, that's a plan of action, right? So that would fall under.
So if we have it in the site plan or subdivision regs, we can build the language in, either not have language, meaning waivers are possible, or we could build in very specific criteria for waivers, where the board has a list, says, okay, you know, shall be this, except for, you know, but a waiver may be applied in these conditions, or, you know, that helps give the board like 1, 2, 3, yep, they meet those, boom, 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 or just leave it, if you don't put those in, it's completely up to the board, the purview at that time, and then the,
I think for consistency, it would be better to have a list of things that were there, so that even with changes of board members from year to year, the rules don't change.
yeah, I like to make things, as we go through it, as clear as possible, still give boards, you know,
They'll give boards some discretion, but really have it absolutely as clear as possible, so that if
for whatever reason, half of us aren't here next year, the new board will still have some guidance as to how things were
Yeah.
and will be.
But it guides everybody, it guides, staff when they're reviewing applications and fielding calls from applicants, things like that, and the building inspector, and everyone else as well, if it's,
Right,
they could say,
exactly.
boom, right here you go, here's our, here's the standard. If you don't meet it, you're gonna have to ask for a waiver, or possibly variance, on that.
Yeah, cause I mean, I'm almost now thinking in terms of trying to find somewhere to like add on to, is this, because of the way our like, for example, the subdivision is probably the first place who needs to figure out where to fit it in. Is
Well,
something
the
like
site plan
15
fits.
point, yeah, cause they're like, it's like what, section 14, I think, for the site plan? But 15, you might do like a 15.2, cause then it, maybe it's a sub one of the first road design standards, but. Cause I'm thinking like we might still need to do a table, but then have some bullet points for items that could be considered for a waiver. But then should we also address, I mean, we've all seen it and there's a lot of land. Now you can't subdivide land like this, but many years ago it was, is they subdivided basically backland with just a 50-foot right of way. In theory, that is the play and that's what it was designed for, so that a road could be put through there in the future. But there'd be an instant waiver, so I don't know if,
Wouldn't that be grandfather?
well, that's but you almost have this, cause if you read just saying there's a landscape buffer, it kinda just says to every type of property, but that's a case where it was, the lot was created with the intent that that land was reserved for access. It could be one of those things where it's just maybe that's part, it requires a waiver, but that's one of the criteria saying the lot characteristics. Encourage it. I wanna say I've seen some language too on stuff like that, so we might be able, you and I might be able to bounce some stuff. There's some communities locally that I think have some stuff about roadway buffers.
I'll take that as an action item for myself, to, kinda try to figure out where best to place, based on our regs, as well as where other municipalities place it. See what other towns do for waiver options, and see what we have in other parts of the site plan and subdivision regs, to see where they, if we have similar verbiage that might work to keep it clear. And that gets us back to the tiering. Do we wanna do 2, 3, 4, different options depending on what it's accessing or how large the development is. I like the 25-foot, like Mr. McKinnon had said, that being the starting point, because it's, we have so many other things that are 25 feet, so it's nice to have one line, it's consistency. Beyond that, I'm not certain where we would, at what level we would add, make it 50 feet.
You almost say it's like,
So like Charlene was mentioning, here,
Yeah.
you almost do like 25-foot minimum. I don't know how you word that for any development. 35 feet or something like that for a roadway serving commercial or something like that, and then you say a subdivision, or you say any subdivision for 25 feet, but then, yeah, I don't know what, maybe it's 20 homes or more? Say it's 45 or 50 feet or something like that? So you almost have 3 tiers.
Because realistically, that would give 100 feet between that and the potential building envelope for an abutting lot.
Yeah,
or distance.
right, because of the adjacent setback, yeah.
Just trying to keep it practical for the new lots and, landowners that are subdividing, as well as, existing lots, to have that, again, harmonious blend, as much as possible.
I think what this is gonna do is, because it's waiverable, initially it's gonna bring attention to where those roadways are in relation to the boundaries, and then it's gonna be a work in progress from there.
Yeah. 25 feet and 50 feet, I guess they sound like a lot, but those, in actuality, they're really not.
25 feet really is a minimum in terms of being able to maintain a buffer because of how tree spacing, or even be able to fit in supplemental, which doesn't always work.
I mean, that's just one tree.
Yeah, depending on the size of the tree, that's, yeah.
Yes, a lot of your smallest ones, boy, that's.
yeah, you could see what would happen too, potentially like on a subdivision where, on a major subdivision, it's underground utilities, you could see them, you know, wanting to clear that buffer out and then throw the utilities, you know, in that section to go up and in. So I think that's where we wanna be clear too, if we want it to stay vegetated as much as possible.
Maintain existing vegetation, yeah. That's why it's being a waiverable item too, is if somebody does ask for a waiver, but say they come in and propose some extremely thick planted buffer, sometimes that's better than somebody just maintaining an existing one with 3 large oaks that do nothing, but it's unfortunately, we don't have nicely laid out lots here, so it's always a unique case every single time it comes in.
I mean, it's kind of the first 8 feet of height, like it's that understory that's
Yeah,
really what you're,
That really blocks noise and
Yes.
light and everything else.
yeah, headlights and stuff, yeah.
I think that's why, you know, we, on a case-by-case basis, you request stuff like that, beefing up a buffer with evergreens or something like that.
We wanna do 25 minimum for, say, 100.
Is it
I'll
any-
try to find what other towns do to see if there is someone else that's going with tiers, you know, or creating a threshold, so we're not just picking random numbers, but, you know, for 20 new lots and fewer, or 20 new dwelling units would probably be the.
I would say
better way.
yeah, because of the way multifamily can work out.
And then do 50 feet for, you know, above that.
I think that's a starting point, and we can see what, you know, what other towns are doing, and I think that Buzz brought up a good point too, is I think we need to keep some consideration for line of sight.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you're kinda digging into it, Ed, if you see what folks are doing or saying about that too.
Yeah, or if the abutting lot happens to be, you know, steep slope from there on.
Right.
And it's non-buildable,
Right.
you know, is that one, even though those are considered critical areas, and we're trying to protect those as well, so. Any further, and again, so tonight, we're obviously not making the changes tonight, so we'll have another discussion on this, probably try to hammer it out, and then, do a public meeting to re-adopt, and we'll try to adopt them cleanly, meaning we'll make as many changes at the same time, so we don't have to adopt and re-adopt and re-adopt. Is there any further discussion on that number, on that item?
Nope, I think that was good.
So my takeaways for that are, where best to place, tier them, and look for, if there's, anything that supports that. Look for the verbiage, on waiver options, including line of sight is possibly one of those, criteria.
Is there a time limit on the grandfather?
Yeah.
Only, usually if the use is abandoned, so somebody had really 2 uses on their lot and they stopped using it for a period of time, documented. Use that protection through, grandfathering.
By how many years?
It can depend on the town. I don't know if off the top of my head if there's a state law around this.
Okay, so it doesn't go by town, individual town?
It may, I'd have to check.
Are you referring to like grandfathered, like the shape of a lot, like if a lot, or you mean?
No, if somebody has a lot of land and they wanna put a septic, well, they just wanna put another house on it. And they've already got an existing driveway.
Yeah, so this would only be pertaining to, since we're talking about roadways, so this is only if it's a new, so a road would be 3 or more houses, or
Only pertaining to
commercial.
new-
Yeah.
So generally major subdivisions, or commercial, industrial,
Okay, thank you.
lots, yeah. Yeah, so if it's a, you know, a simple minor subdivision with just one additional house, and it's gonna be a new driveway or a shared driveway, that would just go through, but if it's, becomes 3 houses, and they wanna put in a new road, that's when it would fall under this, yeah. Of course.
I think private roads is a separate section, so there also be a reference that the same setbacks apply. I mean, they will, right? 'Cause, you know,
Yeah, yep. No cut, no disturbance buffers. Sorry, I'm trying to read Ms. Mooney's, email she sent in.
so this is for wetlands, right? Hers.
Yeah, and as I was going through this, I guess that's where I was coming up with, the same thing, is that, so, for some of our critical areas, which wetlands is one, the wetland itself is protected and has additional zoning requirements or conditional use permit options, but the area around it, immediately afterwards, from the wetland itself, not the setback, is really kinda unprotected from roadways, driveways, and things like that. You can't build a house in the setback, but nothing in our regs currently, my understanding, precludes you from putting a brand new road, driveway, right through the buffer.
Unless
right
it's
through
a
that
vernal
setback.
pool.
Unless it's a vernal pool, yeah, or a street. I think this is probably another one of those areas that's probably best practice, probably, in most communities. Blair, I don't know if you, in your interaction with other towns, kind of have a feel for, is there generally some more protection beyond just the wetland itself, like, so the buffer or the setback is protected in more ways?
Yeah, absolutely. The wetland itself, the part that remains wet all the time is dependent upon that buffer, simply because runoff that comes off. So, most communities absolutely, and usually, there's both. There's a no cut, no disturb, like you're not doing anything there, and then there's like a buffer zone that is, it's protected, it mostly from, like, it needs a review for what it, for anything that, anybody that wants to do something in there, whether that's put a building or put a driveway. So, it depends on the community, obviously, and what you wanna do. Certainly, different gradient of wetlands, different quality of wetlands will have different setbacks. So that's what you'll see a lot of times.
I'm gonna pull up Rochester's ordinance, 'cause
So in my opinion, this is more probably gonna fall into like zoning, and a zoning update
I think that's the only way you can enforce,
versus a,
from an enforcement perspective too, it needs to be in the zoning to say, to be able to enforce if somebody doesn't. Easier to enforce the zoning ordinance.
right, well, applying it, so, in some ways, applying things to site plan and subdivision regs and not zoning really means it's most likely only gonna impact new development. So non-existing homeowner or a lot owner that is just, hasn't built on their lot yet, but wants to put in their house. That wouldn't come before us again for subdivision or site plan. If we put in zoning, unless you add a clause in there for pre-existing lots of record, pre some other date, or pre-existing non-conforming lots, it would apply to potentially any updated development, or, someone already has their house and they wanna make a change. And I think we did that with the stream protection ordinance. I think we included verbiage on there to try to make it be only new development.
So let's say you have a wetlands, right, on your property. And you wanna put up your new garage or barn. Right now, you can put it up feet from the wetlands, right?
Not a structure,
No, but you could put a new driveway in right there.
gravel it, you could put a whole gravel yard right up to it.
That's what I'm saying, that's where we probably have been,
You're wrecking it either way.
Yeah,
So that's why I'm
well,
trying.
that's what, we only have protection against structures, yeah.
verbiage.
This really applies to a subdivision that we have before us, because we have the driveway, going through the one up on Stevensville Road, wetland. So potentially the driveway is going, the driveway was built there, and
Yeah.
that's,
We just gotta make sure, so, sorry, not to stop it, but I have to stop it. We can't, make sure we can't talk about any active cases or potential active applications.
I'm just saying that that's a similar thing that we're looking at,
Yeah,
not making an opinion on it, just.
no, I get it.
Gotcha.
Because we have a quorum, it's gotta be very careful as to what we discuss. So yeah, so again, yeah, so site plan regs, subdivision regs, always new development or a change in a lot to some other use. Zoning, a little bit more strict. It can be applied to, kind of all, including existing houses. Okay, here's where it was, I was right. So in the stream protection ordinance, there's exemption from regulation. Structures, driveways, or wastewater systems that existed prior to June 8th, 2021 are exempt from these stream protection restrictions. So basically, it's exempting anything that was already there. There's some others as well. But it doesn't necessarily protect them from increasing in size or new pieces of structures on land.
I think, so here's one of my concerns is, and we've seen it with like past, developments in which there's a wetland or even, you know, a vernal pool. There's a buffer there, but someone cuts right up to that wetland and, you know, whether intentionally or unintentionally, not knowing, so. And I think about some of the cases that are before us, where is there some way that we can, that those buffers are somehow, somehow noted on the property, like either physical notation on the property, that this is the buffer line, there's a no cut after that, or is it something that is, a deed restriction, or deed requirement that calls out that buffer so that it's documented.
Yeah, I think that's why being in zoning, right, so when we have our 50-foot and our 75-foot, that goes on a subdivision plan, and they're showing the buffers, by having in a 25-foot vernal pool, but if we have, say, a 25-foot no cut, no disturb, that also has to be on a plan, and that's where, I mean, some owners, it's more likely that if it's a required setback, and we want it shown on the plan, a homeowner can actually see, okay, there is a buffer here, and make sure the verbiage is correct. But what I was gonna bring up is, and I've encountered this with some subdivisions I've done, is, for example, the city of Rochester has a requirement, this is in their conservation overlay, similar to our wetland conservation district. This is under their uses allowed within, so there's certain like wildlife and habitat management, invasive species control, removal of hazardous trees, but then they also clearly say the land surface within 25 feet of the edge of the wetland shall not be altered. Herbicides and heavy equipment are prohibited within 25 feet of the edge of the wetland. New lawns may be established beyond the 25 feet from the edge of the wetland, provided the wetland has been delineated and flagged by a certified soil scientist, or in this case, wetland scientist. So that's a case where, on a proposal, you can place a lawn starting 25 feet out from a wetland up, but they do make sure, hey, you don't just go off a plan, you need to have this flagged, because if you do it 10 years after the approval, that wetland might change, and you might have to come back a little bit further, but that's verbiage that, like, the city of Rochester makes sure you actually, I had to show that buffer on a subdivision plan and then prove you know, we're not putting too much development right to it, I'm not showing a tree line inside of it. That's a good one, I think I've found in a local code.
And,
Flagged idea.
Yeah.
I like the
Cause that's at any time, right? Somebody 10 years from now still is required, hey, if I wanna expand my
so
lawn,
that would prevent some of the encroachment that we're seeing.
yeah. But, and, yeah, I think I definitely agree is approaching this into the zoning ordinance. And now it's a setback, now we have a 25-foot and either a 50 or a 75-foot. So there's two setbacks to wetlands at all times that are being shown on these plans, cause normally it's just one setback line. Cause it's just for structures, so. I mean, Rochester does have a provision in here that you can, within the buffer area, you can have structures of 200 square feet or less, but that's because they got a lot tighter there. It's like if somebody wants to put a shed or something like that, but I think we stick with our building provisions at this point. And I think proposing it as a warrant article for a zoning amendment is palatable. I don't think anybody's opposed to providing more protection.
So you can put a shed and not have a problem,
So,
but you can't build a garage.
no, so currently I guess any structure that requires a building permit. Yeah, so I don't know if there's anything,
There's a building, you don't.
I guess I don't know if pole barn is considered. I don't know the technicality of a code, but yeah, okay. So technically, nothing but clearing, or, I mean, you could put like I said, you could put gravel right up to it. That's not a structure, but currently our only setbacks are for structures to wetlands.
A lot of times what it comes down to, with regards to wetlands, is runoff, so therefore impervious surface becomes the issue. So gravel would actually be looked at differently, lawn would be looked at differently. Not ideal, keeping it in its natural state is ideal. But if you're talking about your buffer zone where disturbance is allowed, you know, maybe you allowed you allow pervious surfaces and pervious disturbances. Or minimize, you know.
And part of the reason that is even with, yeah, like a gravel driveway, something like that, a lot of times you get salt or other things applied to it, and without a special buffer between the wetland, the actual wet area, or the poorly drained area, the very poorly drained area, in that driveway or whatever it is, means everything's potentially gonna just end up in there without any kind of filtration or, and you can change the hydrology of it as well.
Unless it was a filter system itself.
Right, yep. So I mean, I'm in favor, and again, we'll have another discussion on this with more information as we look at other towns, but I'd be in favor of, that 25-foot minimum, no disturb, making sure that we can add requirements for signage. We've done that on a few plans, recently for vegetative buffers. The deed restriction, or having them add into the deeds, I think is a good idea, because generally everybody sees their deed when they buy a parcel, so it gives them an idea, whereas the signs could fall down and not be maintained, or just be taken out. The only thing with if you put in the deed, and then later on zoning changes and makes it more restrictive or less restrictive, there could be confusion on that, and so just a reference to current zoning within that restriction.
Or now that most deeds would reference the subdivision plan, and as long as the plan itself depicts with notes or the buffer, and it's not tied to it's tied to what was approved then.
I don't know if there's, I know Sue, I think Ms. Mooney had mentioned 25-foot is kind of starting point as well. There may be criteria that increase that. Or just start with that and go from there.
I like it because it provides pretty much the same protection to all wetlands for vernal pool or not.
So we do have the option of keeping this until we get to a warrant article situation, or kind of conversely, doing both. Putting something in site plan regulations, subdivision regulations, and then having it kind of duplicated in zoning.
That's kind of what I was thinking, because we might not put this forward, you know, we don't wanna put too many warrant articles before, and there might be some other ones, you know, we haven't gone through everything. Part of me was thinking, let's start with the site plan and the subdivision, and then,
And I think we can put that in the buffer strip section of both of those.
Yeah.
That already talks about, you know, a buffer strip of 25 feet, but I think we could add a number in there.
Well, cause that one, yeah, it talks about to the extent feasible, but then number 3 on that talks about providing the natural vegetation to be retained as a buffer along environmentally sensitive areas. But you could almost add a sentence saying, I don't know, at no time shall a buffer, non-disturbed buffer of less than 25 feet or something like that be provided. That's a modification to an existing part, we could just modify the verbiage in part 3 there. That's under 20.1.1.
We have to define environmentally areas.
I think that's one of the issues, is we have, that terminology, but we only have critical areas.
Yeah.
Environmentally sensitive areas, though, is kind of a umbrella term.
Is the fun thing when you start really digging into these and really thinking about it, and how to address it and come up with these questions. And it's good to do it here tonight and then a future meeting, so that, we can hopefully word it clear enough that it's clear for everybody, including applicants. So critical areas, our definition is a disturbed area of any size within 50 feet of a stream, water body, or poorly or very poorly drained soil. Disturbed areas exceeding 2,000 square feet in highly erodible soils, or disturbed areas containing slope lengths exceeding 25 feet on slopes greater than 15%. I really think we should probably define environmentally sensitive areas. And maybe say C critical areas.
It's probably the easiest thing to do.
So I think we would address it, here's my thought on it, is we would potentially address it for zoning, later in the year as a warrant article. But for site plan and subdivision regs, we can address it and incorporate it in this as part of the buffer area, until we decide, you know, to get, how to get through that. Again, I think most of the time that we're gonna encounter this, it's gonna be major subdivisions or commercial development. So it's your larger impacts in general versus, you know, a single house going up, or an existing house that wants to move their driveway or do a change. Well, I think that's important. I think at this time, I think that the area to capture it in is in those two areas. You do it as a buffer.
and I'd be willing to take that one and do some more digging on that and kind of do the same thing, get some, look at some of the different language and look at where it would fit and stuff, the definition.
Fine with that, unless anybody else wants to work on that too. Would you mind seeing if you find a definition of environmentally sensitive areas anywhere?
I've got that marked down.
Potentially we can just add a definition of it to say see critical areas,
Yep.
if that's where it seems to fit.
Yep.
Any further discussion on that part for tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on to, conditional use permits. Blair, do you remember what we got on this one? Or does anybody have,
This procedure, or the procedure of how it's done.
I believe it's the procedure of how it's done, so. So I think everybody, I did get, town council, input on conditional use permits in general, which I believe I shared, with everybody. That's considered, privileged information, so not that I don't think there's too much there, but basically I was looking for clarity on now that we have conditional use permits in our zoning, we've actually had some in there before. Make sure that we're procedurally following the correct path when we get one and how to act on it. My thoughts on it, and we can, if there's we can vote on this and then try to add it to the application so it's clear somewhere. I think that helps for everybody too. You don't always get one of these. Is that if a conditional use permit comes in as part of an application, that we would include it. The application would be noticed. We could always include verbiage of that like we do for scenic roads on the agenda, saying a conditional use permit for X, Y, or Z is being applied for. We can act on it as part of the application. If it is a standalone item, meaning someone's coming before the board just for the conditional use permit, it would obviously have to go out for a butter notification and everything else like any other application does. Third scenario, where we already have an application in front of us, somewhere down the line, the applicant decides, oh, now I wanna ask for a conditional use permit. We likely should not act on that permit or that request that night. It should be re-noticed to abutters, because it changes the scope of the application significantly. And then we would act on it after appropriate abutter notification occurs. So obviously the best option is for the applicant to come forward and.
Your third option, wouldn't they have already done the abutters?
But the conditional use permit is considered, would be considered a drastic change of scope potentially of an application.
It wouldn't have been noticed on the agenda as a conditional use. Kinda like the scenic road, or usually the scenic road one though in the past, we'll just add it to the next agenda, cause it's different.
Ironically, it's very fitting for our next meeting.
Yeah, so ideally, it would be, ideally, if it's a new application, and whatever their plan is to, you know, say again, we're the two areas we have conditional use permits, I believe, are open space, or, well, I'm sorry, only if they're proposing modification of the requirements in the open space, it's like removal of a buffer, or, a wetlands impact. So, both are considered pretty, major changes, so if they're planning those things, they would ideally send us the CUP application at the same time. Noticed, great, but if they, during the course of discussion, they say, oh, okay, actually, you know, I wanna put the road in here, and now I wanna, you know, go through 3,000 square feet of wetlands, that's considered like a pretty significant change, and one that most likely should be renoticed to, butters, cause in a way, it's almost like a zoning, like a variance, you know, process, except avoiding them going to ZBA.
So the real cost would be that they'd have to go out and resend all the letters reading it. So the financial burden is gonna be on the applicant.
Yep.
So we're basically telling the applicant, come in, you think you're gonna need this, you better have it on it, or it's gonna cost you X amount of $100 in order to fix it.
Yeah.
Come to us with a half plan, you better have all your ducks in a row, because we're gonna send you out of here.
Yeah, and if we put it.
In layman's term, I mean, that's really what we're doing.
You nailed it. So if we put it somewhere on the application saying the scenarios, it also lets them see it up front. They see that the application's online, they can see that that might be a requirement. It also helps the board when they get one to say, oh crap, how do how do we handle these procedurally? Do we need to renotice, do we not need to renotice? Because in appeals of conditional use permits, they bypass zoning, they go straight to Superior Court, so making sure we have our process clear for everybody, I think is ideal, and to make sure that everybody gets the proper notice is the other piece of that too. Cause it protects the applicant, so if an abutter decides, oh, they didn't ask us originally, I didn't know they were asking for that permit. There was no notification of that, that might be an appealable item for them.
So we're asking to change our application.
I would say put it on the application is to make it clear on the process, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, there's, the last page of the application is the department use only page that kind of helps us keep track of dates and fees paid, and could almost add a note to that, just note fees required if submitted separately from a site plan or subdivision.
It makes a lot of sense if the applicant decides, oh, we need to do a conditional use permit. For that to be done separately, for a lot of reasons. For one, the abutters to know what's going on. Two, for the board to know what's going on, to be able to see it and understand it, rather than trying to make a decision on something that is brought up.
Yeah.
At the last minute.
Yeah, and I like having stuff written down, you know, even when we have our plan things, it's, you know, step one, act on completeness of the applications. Step two, determine if the design, development or regional impact. Ideally, you know, we should probably have an outline of, for that too, like, you know, development or regional impact. If it does seem to meet this, here's the criteria that could potentially trigger a DRI. Here's the process, once one is determined, you know, very clearly state,
What the limitations are, yeah.
you know, so that's another area where I think we should have a little cheat sheet for ourselves as to, procedurally, to make sure that we're just staying in line, because we have a lot to remember to the board. You know, just on, with our own regs, to remind the state side of it and beyond. And when you don't encounter these every single meeting, when you do encounter one, it could be, you know, an area, plus changes in, some of the state laws with making sure you have very clear notices of decision, you know, what, you have very clear verbiage of, yes, this was approved with these reasons, this was denied for these reasons. We have to be explicitly clear now, or they'll just err on the side of the applicant.
So I'm almost thinking that we maybe just update and place a box on the first page of, you know, below where it says application for conditional use permit. Place a box there that just has a short paragraph describing the procedure as to, more so the fee side, right? 'Cause it's whoever's here and controlling fees, that's gonna be
Yeah, that's what, yeah.
notices, so. Clearly state that if a conditional use permit is submitted in conjunction with a site plan or subdivision application, it will be noticed concurrently with no additional fees, cause it's just adding some terms.
But, I mean, at the top, it's like kind of the first thing that we ask, is like, what are you applying for? Of the applications,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you know, you have like, in subdivision, you have 3 different ones. Conventional, you have an open space, and then you have a lot line adjustment.
Right. But I think it's good to have on the conditional use, because like in this case, we've had questions where, oh, well, do we have to repay the fee? And it's almost like on the conditional use, if somebody goes and says, hey, if you didn't submit this with the original application, you will need to pay.
So you're just saying, putting that warning there, is it?
Just on, yeah, exactly, it's kind of a warning, like, hey, it's almost one of those things, if you're on the fence if you need it, you might as well fill out the application.
You could
Makes
risk-
all of our
risk
lives
$100
easier.
now or 400 later.
Yeah.
It's kind of like your insurance policy.
Yeah, and right now, there's no fee for a conditional use permit.
Right.
The select board hasn't, added one yet. They may at any time, and may change the rates at any time.
Is this suggested?
Yeah, yeah, I think I sent it to the town administrator, for possible inclusion later on.
Find a light night in your schedule to discuss it.
So,
Hey.
so I agree with Mr.
Much
McKinnon,
revenue
that
as we can
somewhere
get. We
up at
need
the
it.
top, if possible, under the application for conditional use permit, maybe we move that up a little bit. Either that, or somewhere on this first page to make it, so it's absolutely clear to everybody. Here's the 3, scenarios that I could think of when we're gonna get one, and what the process is for that. You feel, event.
Yeah,
Taking a
the
stab.
applications are my zone right now, so.
Blair's over here checking his margins, he's checking everything.
There was a lot of wordsmithing, yeah.
Yeah, make the margins narrow, you get all that extra. Okay. Is there any further discussion on
I think that makes sense.
conditional use permits? That was my memory as to what we wanted to address on them as well. Can't remember if there's anything else anybody wanted to address on. Yep. Again, we control those, so technically we can amend them. I will. Application changes for subdivision site plan. I think Mr. Haney was spearheading this one, and Mr. McKinnon.
No, I might have, I think it was just Blair.
Oh,
that was
sorry. Okay.
So
I'll
I
take
emailed
credit.
them around. The two primary things was one, to separate the applications.
Yep.
Because site plan review kind of just got shoehorned into the subdivision application. And a lot of the stuff at the top, it made sense because there was a lot of overlap, but then as you get towards the bottom, particularly the checklist, especially the checklist, is when it began to separate. And some of the language in there was specific to subdivisions. So separating the two out and correcting that language. And then the other big piece was to request a narrative. And I had this whole thing I was gonna, here's what you need to put in your narrative, almost like a checklist, and I realized, we've got a lot of different kinds of applications. You have a lot line adjustment, which could be very, very simple. I don't wanna be requesting like a slew of things for someone to do. And then you have like a major subdivision, and I don't want something to get missed. So I thought something is better than nothing. Let's just ask them to put it on a separate sheet of paper and let them run with it. Let them feel, enter in a narrative that they feel is adequate to explain it to them, explain to us. I'm happy to take suggestions on that piece of ways you can, things we should ask for if there's something, but that was where I landed.
Well, we have the option of saying it's not complete enough and not accept it at the time, if we don't think the narrative is done well enough.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, you have that option exists. If it's asked for and it appears to be insufficient.
Right.
Yes, of course.
It would be up to, if they don't submit anything, it's up to us if it's pertinent or not, I guess, at that point, yeah.
I think you'll find people will feel more inclined to further explain themselves, because it only does themselves better. The more you all understand it, the easier it is for them to get approved. So those were that was sort of the primary thing. There are some, I emailed you all, the two applications that I prepared. I did highlight, some pieces, particularly in the site plan review, because that one didn't exist. That was sort of me creating a new one. And just, these are things that I was questioning. I wasn't sure how to proceed. So, we can go through that, or that can be something that, if you have questions now, ask me and then we revisit it. But, for the most part, the applications are, in a format where they could be used. I went through them pretty thoroughly.
Do you wanna run through, there's a couple of things I noticed, if you wanna just start at the top and work down, be pretty quick.
Which one are you looking at? You looking at the
I'm on site plan review.
Okay.
Even on that, the amendment to approval, amendment to a prior approval, right? Should there be like a line as to say, this, please explain, as to what approval? Date or whatever, or no?
Well, I feel like that would be covered in the narrative, but yeah.
I like that, I really like the idea of a narrative section right towards the front,
I
second
like
page.
that it's the first thing on that list too, yeah. I was thinking too, for site plan review type, we have commercial, multifamily, mixed use. I think we all know there's potential for some industrial to come into town too. Are we just gonna should we do commercial / industrial? I mean, they are kind of shared, I think so we might wanna just modify, say, commercial / industrial and keep it to 3, but I like the idea of doing a mixed use, because I do think mixed use can be looked at differently. So I think that's the only thing on that, is just to bring in industrial, because we do have a commercial industrial use corridor. I like the idea of, you highlighted change of use only, I think that's good, because we do get quite a few change of use. It's
Yeah, yeah.
Good to know exactly, that is the intent of the application.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw,
Is there, so with the change of use only example, would they still go through the entire application though? Or would we tell them to go to only, complete A through D or something?
that's a good point.
Hadn't thought about
Does
that.
it, I don't know if it, well, I mean, it doesn't hurt, they can always put an A, they can put whatever they want if it's not applicable. But I would say it's,
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be incumbent upon them to say something like, is, like certification of monument installation for a change of use only would be a not applicable, but is that a waiver request that they would ask?
Well, I was gonna ask, is certification of monument installation even required under site plan? Do we, more of a subdivision thing?
Oh, yeah, I guess it would be,
Yeah, cause I've never, generally, if it's concurrent, right, but that would be covered under the
subdivision
subdivision.
component to it.
I was thinking too, I mean, just in terms of the space seems pretty, the page seems pretty full, my next recommendation is that we could remove Form E for the site plan review. And you might be able to, within this documents to submit box at the bottom, somebody could, in theory, just write NA to items they don't, or to your point, a note, if it's a change of use, only submit
we do
these
require
forth.
notification in, the site plan regs. So I would say leave that in.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, maybe we still have space to mess with spacing, but I like the point.
I think there's a little bit of more room here, I can expand this box if you want me to.
Just 'cause I do like cause change of use, usually you're only getting a handful of things. They're usually not gonna have a lot to give us at times.
So basically, you want me to give them an option in this documents to submit box, to say that this is not applicable, don't expect it from us.
Kinda like a box for, is it here or NA?
And then on the same page, I don't know if you wanna talk about it here, we have it listed down on this, as well as, we have to update both subdivision and site plan regs. The number of plan sets,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too.
I think, did you change the number of them, Blair? I believe that's the
Yeah.
reduction, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So right now, we require what, like 7 or 10 of the large?
It's six and 10. What I changed was, I changed 6 down to 2, and that was in consultation with Kevin, but of course, you guys have to pay it. And I just changed full size, to 24 by 36.
But didn't we say that we wanted to get them electronically too?
So, at the top there, it says documents to submit, and it says all documents shall be provided in Adobe
Okay.
PDF format as well. I can put that again in the box.
I think, yeah, say
Saying
it,
it
so
twice?
they can't say they missed it if it's it's sandwiched on, 2 slices of bread on top of that list.
And they can always request a waiver of that part if it's like
Right.
a very minor site plan
It's a hand
situation.
sketch or
It's a hand sketch, change of something where they potentially could ask for a waiver of that, but I think at this point, asking for that is advantageous to everybody. It makes it easier to get the plans online for the board and for abutters and the public. Makes it a lot easier for us to review if we're looking at them online. One less thing for everybody to, for Kevin to scan.
What do you say, like, it should automatically, we have to have a PDF.
Right. Well, most of the,
PDF is not very tough, you can take a picture on your phone and make a freaking, make a file. It's
well, not even that, if you're a surveyor or engineering firm, you probably have it as that, because you legally have to keep records of it.
Because
So
it
a lot of
does
times
make a
they have it
huge
sitting there.
difference to all of us that are busy in our schedule, to get it on a PDF ahead of time.
Yep. I like to do
Well,
it.
Kevin ends up
Looking at it.
scanning, if things come in.
Again, you might see this example come up, and I'll probably mention it, we do have a new application that came in with probably a $2,000 on it.
Yeah.
And I talked to Blair about it, it's for a change of use, and it's not a big business, and some fellow trying to,
Yeah.
one use, they're trying to change it to something else, and it's saying,
an applicant can come in, an applicant can fill out something with just their name on it and say, here you go, here's my application. And we have to act on it.
Right.
And we can say,
Determine
complete,
completeness.
no, thank you. So, or as it sees fit, the board has quite a bit of leeway, I think, on what we act on, so.
I think PDF is fair.
Yeah.
I think my concern, well, I don't think my concern, but just trying to be fair with the applicants, which is the reason why I wanted to cut down the number of, large sets that we got, because I literally had an engineer say, hey, they're paying, you know, and it triggered in my mind, yeah, I don't think they sit on my desk, so I looked at, like, why are they paying for 6, when, all right, 2, fair enough, or 3, or whatever. So the same mindset goes into kind of, you know, again, I have just, you know, low guy, no survey or whatnot coming in and drawing stuff, which I have no issue taking it. I think it's fair to ask them to do the worst case scenario, I can convert it. But do we require them to have it actually drawn out, you know, are we fine with people drawing as opposed to, I guess it's a case by case.
I was gonna say, that's, I mean, those scenarios seem like they're 10% of the problem, but you have some medium-sized applications that are having to be scanned, and that's what's sucking up time.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, those are coming from firms that probably already have the PDF, or they have the machinery to scan it even faster, and you don't even have to worry about it, because again, it's
And
kind of
a
on
better
them.
scan.
Yeah,
Just scan it,
Better
the file
quality.
size goes way up generally, and the quality goes way down, so it's, yeah, I think there's consensus on that.
Make a PDF.
Yeah.
I think it's great that they have a PDF for people who can do it, or who have surveyors, and
Yeah.
have already got the PDF, they're knowledgeable, but like you said, if you've got some little, oh, we've got a lot of old-time people in
As long as you guys
this
are-
town who can't do it, and they come in with a hand drawing,
like
As
one
long
of,
as you guys are
yeah.
fine with, again, it's gonna be case by case.
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but like, if it's that simple one piece of paper, he can make it a PDF for that. Come on, I
Not
can't afford it.
necessarily, not necessarily, there's so many people who are still unfamiliar with the computer, believe it or
No,
not.
but when they bring the application to him and they have the map that they drew out on a piece of paper, he can turn that piece
He
of paper
can.
into a PDF.
But why should he?
Not well.
No, yeah, I agree, they shouldn't be on us,
I mean, there is the part, I work for the
for the town.
Yeah, I get it, but I mean, that should be, brought in front of us, but if it doesn't have a PDF, that should be okay.
Well, then, I'm gonna say something really unsensitive right now. The people that are old like that should probably find somebody in their family, their kids, their grandkids, or somebody that can turn a simple piece of
Well,
paper into a
that's
PDF.
nice if they've got it, but if they don't,
But then that's like the far right extreme.
So again, this is only gonna come up if it's a new site plan application, means change of use in a property,
Not to
or
Americans.
a commercial,
No.
or a major, or a subdivision, sorry, and so it can be minor. Basically, if, I hear what you're saying, and I wanna be conscientious of that, and again, I think that's where our purview comes to, you know, if it's something where that very simple hand-drawn thing is sufficient to act on for that specific case, then the board would have that option to say, yes, we, you know, waive that part. But again, any application's not cheap, because you're getting an application fee and a butter fee, so you're potentially talking hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get the application in front of us, so. But again, I think we have quite a bit of leeway for those. I don't wanna get stuck on like one-off things on either side of it, but I do wanna be conscientious of them. I think that's our out for it, is we can act on it anyway. We can choose to act on it as long as we feel there's enough information on the application and on what we're being provided to do that. Yeah,
The more, the type of application would be like a change of use possibly that might be a simple drawing like you're talking about. Or,
Nobody's come to a 10-lot subdivision with a hand sketch, so, yeah, right, yeah, that's,
I think just bring it down on the application is the starting point.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then even if that shaves off 15% of the people from, you know, that progress.
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I like the idea of, I really do like the idea of going to two 24 by 36s, because unless Sean's coming in to look at something, would you want full size then? Unless somebody's coming into the office, it just sits there, but,
Very rare.
and it is, from a cost perspective, I mean, it can, a 25 plan set for a subdivision can cost over $100 to print, depending on where you go, so.
Because some of these are 17, 18 pages long.
Yeah, so you're at $100 there per plan set, which is, it's on them, but again, it's kind of a waste of paper in my mind too.
Since you came into my office about a month ago,
Yeah,
my desk was full. Before I left vacation, I couldn't. Still though, people sending in applications, if you go look at my desk again, just full of the apps and all that stuff, I have a pile, but it's full of just giant plan sets that just sit there, no one looks at them. Office in general is just full. So it's just,
yeah,
So realistically, we need one really good set for the file, one really good set for anybody that might come in and wanna look at it.
chief, fire chief,
Yeah.
police chief, Sean.
And I think the input from police, fire, road agent, building inspector is that they're fine with 11x17s. They generally can see enough information on
Yeah,
that.
usually, now and then, if it's something, the chief has been like, I'm having trouble reading something like the shade one where it had all kinds of stuff all over the place.
Yep.
You know, he had walked in and kind of take a look at it, and then every now and then, Dale will unfurl something and.
Sure.
go through it.
Yeah.
The big same thing with
Yep.
Sean,
So,
but it's not often enough that it justifies, definitely not 6. 2 is fair enough.
yep.
Does that reduce the cost for the people who are applying
Yeah. That's,
significantly?
Yes.
not to, no, there's no fee change to us, it's
Not-
just
yeah.
their cost though, yeah.
Good. Yeah, what did we need 6 for anyway?
And it's 6, so it's every time, so like on some
Yeah.
cases where
Mhm.
every time there was a change, they print out the plan sets. So you're getting,
But who are they for?
Well, there were for departments. large-
departments and also the board, and, you know, there used to be, we'd have the large
But they
plan
all
sets here,
end
but.
up at you anyway to look at.
Right.
There are some,
anybody on ever.
So 2 is good.
The other thing we could say,
That's the only way I like to look
As
at
long
it
as you have
anyway.
the PDF, I think most people like.
Right, but
at
that being said, with the PDF, I do agree with it, but I work in an environment in HR where I have people, older people coming up to me all the time who do not, and not even older, in their 50s, and they do not know how to use the computer. They're coming to you with a hand-drawn thing, they're not using the computer. You know, and if you can do it, that's fine, but we should have it on a piece of paper saying, if you can't do it, it's okay, you know, bring it in.
Yeah, I think it's such a, and I think that's the
But it's
nature
gonna
of
be
the
a
town we're in
commercial
too, yeah.
Building, it's
Yeah.
gonna have a PDF attachment because they're spending a lot of money on it, you get a handwritten thing, that guy doesn't have any money.
Without getting too crazy, but this is how I approach a lot of all public applications, a lot of compliments, a lot of people who've been here for a very long time,
Right.
and I, you know, I don't wanna take care of it. So a lot of times I kinda give the hit, hit
Yeah.
what you can,
Mhm.
you know, in front of the board, we'll see what they say. Draw it out, would, you know, that may be the case, look in one of your folders, that may be the case as well,
Right.
coming up, so. Again, I think if the overall, most people can handle a PDF.
Cause I've gotta say, if you've got
Right.
50 acres of land in this town, you've been around for a while. If Fernald can't find his lot land or where his section is, you know, if he's gotta hire somebody, maybe he can do that, maybe somebody else can't. So if he can do that, he's got a PDF, if somebody else can't do that, then.
Yeah, but for these two areas, you know, we even talk about like Mylars and stuff, so whatever they provide to us has to be in sufficient format that it meets the requirements to be recorded at the registry of deeds too, so there's a lot of things beyond us that kind of limit someone just coming in with too basic of a drawing.
Well, that's what I think too, it's a 1 in 10, I mean, I would say it's even less than 1 in 10 applications, if that's what we gotta deal with, 1 out of 10.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we had a couple years ago, we had 2 cases where like we almost worked with the applicant, and that was like unheard of to have 2 applications where there was a lot of hand-drawn stuff and we were helping. But that's the nature of the town as well, it's a small town with an agricultural, yeah.
that's typical. So it's not, usually it's not a total stuff, you know.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Blair and, you know, you both had markups on here, do you have additional items?
No, I think that, The site plan review request for waiver sheet, so a couple of sheets down. Is there any benefit, do you think, I don't think we've seen really more than like 2 or 3 requests for waivers. Do we think there's any benefit to maybe only providing 2 or 3 rows, but then giving some space for them to actually, like on the old one, where it let you write a couple lines? Cause in this scenario, the reason for waivers so short that they'd probably have to attach, it's that, or we put a provision here saying if you need more space, attach
And notate here.
additional narrative or something like that.
Yeah, so, this could have been highlighted in yellow, cause it wasn't something I was sure if this is how we want it, but I could just, you know, make bigger boxes. We do have this form as a separate document that could be made available in Word, to somebody so that they could type it in and then they could fill in the box that they want. But yes, and then we can also put a note at the bottom, add additional papers or just additional sheets.
Yeah, right below, if additional space is needed, provide additional, narrative or something.
Do it on a separate sheet.
But I could see just, I think, cause we're gonna, the majority of times we get a waiver, it's 1 or 2, maybe 3, site
Okay.
plan, maybe it's more, but yeah, maybe you keep the limits of what it is and just reduce down to 3, so basically you have bigger.
More
I
space.
think that makes sense, just cause we see a lot of people handwriting waivers.
Yeah, and add that verbiage, you know, if additional space needed, like you said, you know, attach additional sheets here, and then number of additional sheets attached, you put a box, so they have to fill in, so we, you know, again, tracking purposes of,
Yeah.
we got 1 page, oh, I give you 3 pages. Well, we got 1.
Yes, we can absolutely do that.
It's that, or it's the old way where you would do, somebody did a 1 sheet per waiver request, but I'm always a fan of simplifying it.
No, I don't think that's a good idea. I mean, the reason why probably people handwrite them is because our PDFs are not fillable. I mean, I wonder how many people would actually be filling them in, typing them in, if we gave them the opportunity. Typing it
You make it fillable, great, but.
in. Yeah, I say that, but I don't know how to, so I don't know if they have that capability, but, certainly I can change the number of boxes. I mean, I can do it for the subdivision application too. I mean, most come in with, you know, less than 4 or 5. If they're gonna come in with a slew of them, then they should be going to a separate sheet. That should not be a problem.
Right.
No, I think that's great, clean it up, make it 3, 4 boxes.
Okay.
make it-
Yeah, I guess at a minimum, just add that requirement for additional narrative. if
That-
no
I think that's what I
space.
saw in most other towns too, is that verbiage on most things.
And then I think the application fee schedule, are we just gonna use the same schedule on both applications ideally? Cause then if
I
it's
didn't
ever
wanna
updated, it just
Yeah.
carries over to both. There's
Exactly.
really no reason to have a separate fee schedule for both.
This we'd have to go to the select board for.
Right.
So if-
No, but I meant like, you know, it's a site plan review application, but it has subdivision, but I think the whole point, I guess, is if we ever update this, it's applicable
Oh, we
for
already have
both.
2. Did you, is this a change or is this what our current one
No,
is?
that's, the only thing I did was change some font sizes, just to get everything squished into 1 sheet of paper.
Yeah,
But no, the content has not been changed.
okay.
And both have the same identical one.
Yeah, and on this, I don't know if we would have to, if there's anywhere else that this is published on the town website, but this is part of our application and not like called out as a separate fee schedule. We need to make sure that we're referring to the most updated version. So we should almost pull it out. And
Pull
say-
this out?
and Put on the application, you know,
See fee schedule?
fee schedule published by town.
Okay, I don't have a problem with
And
that.
then I would coordinate with, town administrator and select board to make sure that if there's any changes, but I don't think we have any changes to do because subdivision's already listed, site plans are listed separately. So it's already spelled out separately. The only thing we don't have on there is if it's a concurrent application, or subdivision site plan, you know,
How is that handled?
my guess is they're paying both fees,
Normally,
which I think is appropriate.
So you're saying one, pull it out and
Reference it somewhere on the application.
reference someone in the application. And and two, check into this concurrent application.
Probably page one. If there's additional room in that box.
Gonna get, those fonts are gonna get tiny.
Well, it should be just included in the application, is one of the requirements. I mean, we have all our other requirements. If the fee isn't on there, it should be on there. On the first page where they've got the 6 check boxes of, 10 plan sets, 2 large plan sets.
Oh, I see, yeah, there might be space there after Form F, application fee schedule in parentheses. Just something describing dual fees for
What's
concurrent.
that application fee schedule? That's it.
Cause this is what gets filled
Maybe
out for
add
the
that
application.
verbiage at the end of that, application fee schedule, and appropriate fees paid.
Okay,
Oh, I see, the physical check for paying it, I see what you're saying. It's kind of a loophole, somebody could just submit it and never give you the check, and, well, I submitted it.
right, so the document to submit is paying it, you're saying.
Yeah, or they would go online, get this fee schedule, the appropriate one, which again, since it's administered by the select board, I just don't wanna embed it into some other process that we don't know it's there, and this could be different than what's actually published by the select board.
Right, cause they can amend this anytime.
Right, cause we don't control this. I like having it with it, cause it makes it simple, but that's my concern is that when you control this, I would wanna leave it in.
Well, yeah, to your point, it's, every time it's updated, we have to update both of these now.
I feel like if you don't put some kind of, in each application, some kind of denotation of what it costs, I will get applications for people. And then I'll be chasing people.
Well, we're not gonna act on it if they don't
I know,
pay the fee. Yeah, but I hear what you're saying, I hear what you're saying, that's why I thought maybe if we had it in that checkbox is, did they check every single thing? If they didn't, it's gonna be a problem.
Well, then that's almost the case in that first sheet, you should also just say make reference available on town website or something like that, cause they're gonna, somebody's gonna ask the question, well, where is it? I don't know,
we should put that application section
yeah,
right next to it.
right, yeah, it'd be right,
I understand your point. The other part though is I feel like an applicant, anything, it's good to have it laid out what you're paying for, And I think to make this kind of search number out, it's to be honest, it's confusing as it is, of like what people have to pay. A lot of people, I have to go through it and really like study and be like, all right, this is what you're doing, that takes me a minute or two just for me to do it. I don't think.
Yeah, I think if we can, that would be a takeaway item to see if there's a way to make that easier. But
I
that is,
understand it now, when I first started, I'm like,
yep. Oh yeah, it should just be, number of lots, times, it should be all like multiplication, right?
there's a lot of math involved. And there's
Yeah,
like-
but you can make the math easier to follow.
Yeah.
And I think other towns do that, so we can add that as a note.
well, one thing we don't have to discuss it tonight, because I think there's a lot of background research, but at some point, I do think, I don't know does it say when the last time that was updated? Do we have a date on this at all? Probably not.
Should have one, but.
No, we should put a.
Because, I mean, just based on costs for my projects, those costs are low now. Especially the fact that for, say, a site plan, it's $1 per 100 square feet. So a 5,000 square foot building is only $125. So,
We should do more.
yeah. Well, we could pull from numerous, for example, Rochester is $300 as a base fee, and then 175, so they're different, but I think we could pull from most town, I'd say we're probably well below a lot of surrounding towns.
Here it has better, but I don't know.
And so a lot of them, they do for 0 to 1,000 square feet, it's X cents per square foot, or you can do $1 per, you can always equate it that way, but,
And that
and that's the
generally-
way a lot of towns do it, is a tiered system.
And that makes a lot of sense for, obviously, the fees are really there to try to offset all the costs of the town of having staff that has to review these and everything else. Professional review, and we're sending it out, they have to pay for that, but before it even gets to that point, we have to have planning staff, SRPC, land use clerk, building inspector, someone is looking at those first, so it makes sense to try to look at those, make sure they're in line with current standards, best practices, so that, you know, we don't wanna unjustly inflate them to make it so prohibitive to people, but we wanna make sure it's also in line with, you know,
I'm gonna figure out what the market
the
rates
need
are.
that's gonna be
Fair market.
substantiated.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, by, you know, if it's a 200,000 square foot thing. Yeah.
Should be the cheapest.
Right.
I can take a few, I mean, I within my, I can look at other towns and see what they do.
I can,
I think that makes sense, cause eventually it's gotta go probably through Chris to you guys.
Put it in the table and just submit it.
You send and say, hey,
Yeah,
this is
just-
what I see.
Here's the communities, here's what they're doing, and just put it in the table.
On top of that too is, post office, too. So certified letters, and I send them letters.
yeah.
Right, that's why some towns actually, you don't submit, you submit like an initial base fee, but anything regarding mailings is, they send you, say, hey, before, you gotta pay this before you receive approval or something like that, because it's always changing. But I think maybe, I mean, you could probably pull from Dover and Rochester, obviously they're larger, more well-developed, but I think even Barrington, Durham, 4 or 5 towns, I bet in this area you'd find. Yeah, cause those are all towns too that used to not have town planners or larger planning staff, and as their development grew, it's just pushing out, so like they were us 15 years ago in terms of staff. Yeah,
Helps to pay people too.
well, and that's, it's, towns always paying more benefits, more salaries, so the whole point is.
Don't
it's-
even
it's
tell
not-
me.
Yeah.
Alright, so we'll, you sure you want? Take
I have no issue doing.
I wouldn't look up 100 towns, I'd look up a few of the surrounding towns, the bigger ones are,
Or reach out to, I can always assist with that too, just reach out to me if you have questions, you wanna run something by me, cause
towns with a planner generally have better forms, cause they have someone that's actually on staff that's job is to do that. So I'd look at that, try to see if we can find another one, so at minimum, look at potentially revising the fee,
Yep.
adding an adopted amended date would be helpful, and potentially, have the select board consider adding a fee for conditional use permits.
yeah.
Three fun takeaways on that.
So I could work with Kevin, if you wanna look at stuff like that, we can coordinate that.
You wanna send that thing over to Chris so we can put it on an agenda?
Yeah, we'll get,
I'll talk to Chris about it. Where,
Yeah, we can figure out a timeline of, I mean, it doesn't take that long, no.
no, I think,
I just don't wanna see it fall off the,
Yeah.
way. I wanna make sure we get it,
oh, don't worry, we'll give work to do.
fine.
All right, did we address everything?
Yeah,
And is there a separate concurrent application? Cause right now we have a subdivision application, site plan application, we mentioned concurrent applications, but they technically fill out both. Right.
yes, because it's 2 separate applications, they're just being heard at the same time.
Or it's-
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
And obviously, there's a ton of overlaps, they're gonna feel silly, there's gonna be doing, but I don't think we should make a 3rd application.
Nope,
I've never had a town have a separate application for it, yeah.
okay.
Everything after that, I didn't really change too much in the checklist, piece of it, because a lot of it's just simply what you're submitting, but if it referenced subdivision, I would have just edited, and I did clean up the language, there was some, some grammar and some just nonsensical stuff in the original subdivision, so it's been, I went through each line item, it's been cleaned up, and one for site plan review was probably 90% the same as the subdivision, but there are a few separate ones.
Okay.
So I just, yeah, like I said, cleaned it up.
So what I would like to see on these, since at our next meeting that we seem to have time, I can't remember what we'll talk about the agenda.
Not the next one.
14th, but maybe the second meeting in September, that we add this as an agenda item to, adopt, the amended submitted
idea.
application.
Yeah, I mean, what it could be is like, everyone's kind of got little tasks, and you get it into Kevin, and he puts it on the agenda, it can be, so we'll only have to do maybe one or two in an evening, is that what you're thinking? We're not gonna try to do all of these again in another evening, with cases.
Right.
No.
As they come in.
No, but something like this, like these, we've already kinda gone through it, unless there's some substantive change that happens after this. This would be just, you know, you.
Adding a
us-
couple
us
notes, yeah.
Putting on the agenda that we're gonna look at it, and that so we have a public hearing, if we even need one. I suppose better to err on the side of allowing one, and then just adopt them then. Again, most of these things are actually making it easier for everybody, and adding a lot more clarity in my.
And as pointed out, I think making it cheaper as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that was it for me.
It's the same thing in that table, yeah. Just,
Yeah.
most of that wants to match.
One thing I did wanna, just put out there, should we have a separate application for design review, since that does require butter notification, or should we just keep that? I don't know, what do they submit now?
It is a separate application, just a one-page application.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even see that.
That's okay. It's actually, that's more narrative based.
Yeah,
It's got like just a, you know.
half of the sheet is almost like,
Exactly,
yeah.
it's just, yeah, it tells what you're doing.
Ideally, our website would have any kind of town forms, fees, permits that are gonna be requested, be probably on one page, but, you know, linked to it from, you know, planning board would have links, say, oh, site plan reg, you know, site plan application, it's gonna link just back to that page and spots, we don't have 10 different spots where these could potentially,
Well, there is one spot really out there.
yeah, okay,
Yeah, so that's like, it's application form.
the cloud.
Yeah, it's exactly. But I think that's the reason, even that, I'm not building it,
It is, yeah.
Are we able to submit those online right now?
the application. If you send it to me, yeah,
People can submit this online, so
Well-
that they can technically link their PDF to this and send it to you? If they wanted to?
If they had a PDF of, if they had this
were
filled
able
out
to?
as PDF, yes,
people do this electronically all the time.
Okay,
Yeah, they send it to me, I mean, that's probably
It's not an online submittal, it's just you're emailing it to Kevin.
It's like a copy.
Those are two different things.
yeah,
Go
it's
ahead.
not, right.
There- An online application
yes.
is like a form embedded in the code of the website that you submitted. He's talking, that doesn't exist. The application online, you download it, you either print it and hand fill it out, or, I don't know, type on it, and then you email it to Kevin. That's the submittal that we have right now.
Yeah, he's
We
still-
don't have an embedded application like you would to sign up for a subscription or something like that,
Is there a reason why we don't?
because that would be a complex website.
Trying to get the internet upgraded here.
Coding.
that'd be our town limitation.
My wife can do it for you, but
And same thing with fees paid and stuff, we don't have, I don't think we have anything.
And it's a
Electronically either at the point.
not to get too complex, but it's a cybersecurity issue too,
Right.
because it becomes a point of attack. You just don't want it, it's not,
Will they do your driver's license,
and,
and you can pay your tolls and?
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right now, it's staff, tech, and cost limitations on the town. You'd probably
But
see
if they're
that,
upping the price on,
but that, you'd be
Not gonna
upping it.
cover it.
I'll tell you, I don't think I've ever seen a town that accepts a subdivision site plan, no planning board, I don't think I've ever seen have an electronic application in the state.
just for,
Yeah.
I like the idea.
Kevin, where, it's, the forms and documents, it doesn't include. Under, it's not there under planning board,
The design review?
is it somewhere?
Yeah,
so what are
where?
you talking about?
Well, our application forms.
So if you go to your website.
I'm looking at it right
So
now.
actually, just look behind me, right? So, this is it right here. Okay, so you can just go to the department, so you go to planning, right? You here, and then right here, it's the first thing, and same thing with zoning. So if you click on here, it takes you to here.
And then there's
There,
design,
it's the same page, clearly.
design review top center.
Yeah, design reviews here, I put the condition of use. So if there's
I think it makes sense, because then it's, if it's ever amended, it's there, yeah. And it'd be right next to the other, be hard to miss.
It does look like the design review application should probably, you said that abutters get notified, so we should probably add that to that application.
Maybe it's a 2 or 3 sheet thing now.
Yeah, I can clean this one up too.
Yeah.
Okay.
For doing them all.
Yep, absolutely.
So hopefully-
This is the time to do it.
I think that's a good item for, you know, hopefully one night we can put those on an agenda and just readopt them. Because again, what we're doing is ideally making them easier for people and clearer.
I mean, right now, the process is, because a lot of people, it's almost like I steer them towards design reviews. You know what I mean? Because they kind of come and they have this stuff, and I'm like.
Our subregs, I mean, specify that they really should be utilized, you know, they're very, very helpful.
So usually when I'm having those conversations, I kind of, I hit the verbal thing like, hey, you gotta notify abutters. I wouldn't mind if we talked a little, there was a way that we could discuss what each application does, like where you are in the process. 'Cause I emailed out, hey, if you're here, you do this, what? If you're here, you do this, what? If you're, if you want to do a conceptual, non-binding, come in, no plans, drawings, that kind of stuff, more information, conversation. Then, blah, 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 design review, a bit more in depth. But as I notified, you can't come in with on plans, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that maybe we could put a blurb somewhere on this if we're gonna make it different.
Did we already say that?
That kinda just summarizes the process, so, you know, more formal process, still non-binding.
Yeah.
Abutters required to be notified,
Almost like, in some cases.
non-engineered plans still.
But it sounds like, almost like we could take those emails that Kevin is sending, cut and paste them onto a document, clean it up a little bit, and entitle it like, the overview of the Nottingham Planning Board process.
A lot of
Oh,
towns
and
do
it's a PDF.
FAQs, they'll do it
Yeah,
for that,
it's a
yeah.
PDF that you could send out to folks, and you don't have to send emails, you just go.
A lot of them do it like, hey, if I'm building a garage, who do I go to first? And it's usually don't go right to the planning board, go to the building inspector, which a lot of people probably do, but.
Even like a hover over, like, if you like hovered over design review, but yeah, just some kind of like quick description, this was.
A tutorial, just a
Yeah.
short tutorial.
Even conditional use permit, cause that can cover that conditional use permit. Earlier, like, what I.
Yeah.
Explained a little bit of what it actually does.
Yeah, I like the idea of having a frequently asked question section on the website that we can direct people to, but also if there's ways to incorporate quick verbiage on an application, you know, to do it there. Obviously, we spell it out in the regs, we make it very clear, but it's,
Should I have put on a type of list?
yeah, for that, you know, it'd be a running list. We'd update it for the frequent asked question part. We'd update and add to it as it goes, you know. Building inspector Dale would say, yeah, here's some stuff I would like to see from building a garage or shed. Go talk to the building inspector.
What is
That
it?
kind of stuff. Yeah, what is a setback? Yeah, good ideas. Okay. Is there any further discussion on, any of these pieces? So we'll take a future action on subdivision application, site plan applications, and design review application. Hopefully towards the end of September, if we can keep enough room on the agenda for, that night, for that one. Appendices corrections. I know, scenic road changes from E911 maps, which we have kind of a separate item, to tax maps. I think that was one thing I had noticed before. Update the appendice with the private scenic or emergency lane designations to match whatever the town, current town status is. those are two that I can think of. And then maybe looking at one for, to see if you could find where we pulled the image for road driveway lengths, where the note was missing for over 900 feet.
Yeah, it's almost, I think we might have to just recreate that table, 'cause where that came from.
Yeah, and it's not, ideally we'd have it clean, it's not that big of a deal. I couldn't find, it spurred my curiosity again, as to, can towns regulate road driveway length? Any town necessarily that applies, they added different requirements for like over 1,000 feet, you know, may require a,
Waiver?
no, like over 1,000 feet may require a, you know, a drainage and erosion analysis, you know.
Well, should there be a waiver too if you're over 1,000 feet for the fire apparatuses or whatever
Well,
like that?
I think that's where different code comes into play, and I think it's outside our purview. That's where I was trying to find that. I emailed the building inspector to see if he could identify anything. I haven't heard back from him yet. I didn't email the fire chief, to see if there was anything there, but I think from long distant memory, I believe, I remember seeing something that becomes unprotected at a certain length. So the fire chief or the building inspector can require additional things, like say sprinklers, when normally you can't require a sprinkler system. But they can, my understanding, my memory, in certain situations, one being maybe a very isolated home, that they're not gonna be able to get to very quickly.
Wouldn't be like, oh, I'm just thinking of a waiver.
You're also probably thinking of if it's just a single lot that somebody comes in for a building permit, right? Like, how does that?
Right. so-
Yeah, cause to your point, we have a limit to a dead end road, in theory, that should also apply to a driveway, but.
Or if in fact
a
that
gray
somebody
area.
has 23 acres and they wanna put their house back a half mile into that 23 acres.
How do
we're
we,
gonna tell
how do
them
we
to keep
control
their
that?
driveway. We don't tell them if there's potholes or bumps and what they can't go through or what the width.
I don't know, can you legally require
That's what I-
them to do a waiver? I would.
I don't know, again, I'm just asking, we're
Yeah,
talking
we-
about it.
They also have to be required to submit an application to be able to get a waiver.
But I feel like in those, both those scenarios, that, you know, I think I've seen verbiage of towns that require, like, if it's on a plan, that they basically, and I think we may have this verbiage somewhere, they basically release the town from, you know, liability and things like that. of
Yeah, liability,
Knowing
yeah.
that, again,
You
yes,
said
it's your
you're on-
ideal to be out in the middle of nowhere, and that's wonderful and peaceful, but you're also making it, you know, the likelihood of having emergency services reach you in a timely fashion.
Well, there's RSAs to that in the private roads, so there is.
Private
There are RSAs that, yeah, for private roads that say
Yeah, and that's part of the
waiver of
verbiage that's what I'm
liability.
thinking of, that, but for driveways,
Driveways,
again, I
Yeah,
checked
I don't
a number of towns, I couldn't find anybody that specifically, anybody that limited the length. So again, I think that goes to code and to life safety, fire safety, it is outside our realm. If I find something different, you know, I'll bring that up, we can potentially add that to the appendix or somewhere as appropriate. But right now, we don't have a limit.
Are we on map updates or are we on the other one?
What's that? I was still on the appendice corrections, so those are the ones I can remember for appendices. I know we talked about pulling them out, making them separate, but if they're in, already these, if they're in zoning too, that's where we get,
So, I made a list. It doesn't appear that there's any applicable appendices in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
It doesn't appear that there's, essentially 3 that are overlapped, that are in both site plan review and subdivision. All the roads in Nottingham, and that also tells you whether it's a private or public status. Clearly, they're probably out of date by now, like I think you just accepted a couple or something like that. So,
Just a
And we
couple?
just changed it for updates too.
okay, yeah, so, so that,
We have new roads.
yeah, so it's clearly already up, you know, out of date, and probably has been multiple times in the last year. So, list of roads and public-private status.
plus
A list of pre-approved future road names. Now, this could be a static list, I don't know how often you add and remove that, but you have to figure, once a new road's created through a subdivision, the list becomes, you know.
Appendix 1 gets updated, appendix 3 gets updated.
Yeah,
Off appendix 3, it goes on to appendix.
right, exactly.
Well, some towns now that are on E911 don't even do suggested, it's now E911 generally will control, you can't do names that are
Yeah, these
a
were.
certain way,
These
so.
supposedly, when we did the pre-approved list, they went to the select board and 911 to get the names, and it was to try to like avoid all these new roads that don't really fit the character of the town of being, you know, Jimmy Lane or, you know, Susan Drive. And
Yeah, I've usually seen in the past where somebody has a road
That
name,
was more for a suggestion.
It is,
Right.
totally just suggestions, it's saying these have already been validated and cleared, if you wanna use one, great, it's one less step you have to go through of trying to, you know, make sure you get approval from the town and the state.
cause in a lot of cases where you're E911, I've dealt with where you actually have to submit, say, what you want for a road name, and then whoever the E911 administrator is in the town clerk or whatever, they authorize, say, yeah, that's fine.
So Blair, do we pull these out and call it a reference document rather than an appendix?
Yeah, so what you would do is, let's say in the road layout section, there's of the site plan review or both, the subdivision regs, there's reference to naming the road. You would reference the title, see, the list of the town-approved future road names document as amended. And that's just how you would reference it in the regulations. So this way it sits outside of it and it's updated and you've captured yourself at all times.
Makes complete sense.
So there's three that are overlapping, the road names, pre-approved future road names, and, map of fire cistern and dry hydrants. So those three are in both site plan review and subdivision.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
So people have been able to name their own roads up until when?
No, they still can.
They still can.
Will they still be able to?
Oh, yeah, yeah, this
They
didn't
just
change it.
suggested.
Those are just suggestions.
A few years ago.
That are pre-approved, I guess.
Yeah, a few years ago, we thought it would be, it came to the board, you know, that we look at town road names and things like that, and there was, went out to the public to submit names that they would like to see, for potential inclusion. And those went to the select board, there was a hearing for it, I believe, and then it got cleared with like E911 or 911, make sure that they were, so if 911 took a bunch off, like there was a lot of, Native American names that people wanted to use, but because pronunciation or spelling could be
Most of
considered
them
very
are the same.
difficult, they 911 pulled most of those off, so there was that, but yeah, it's
So
totally
could there
just,
be something in that verbiage that says that they're able to, because that makes it sound like they can only pull from the approved list of names. So is there some way to
Yeah, I can,
make
so
it,
if
make it known?
yeah, so stepping back, if the board decides to pull this list out, then we would have to have a reference in our new document, or in the regulations, to the list. And, wherever that place is, it could be that this is a list of pre-approved names, however, you are free to use, to suggest other names that must be approved.
Okay, yep,
Yeah,
yep, yep.
I think most of the new roads I've seen the last 4 years on applications have been like random names they've come up with.
They might not even know that the list exists.
I don't think people.
that could be on
yeah.
us to just remind them during the application process, especially if it's something with a new
Typically,
road.
a developer's gonna wanna name it after themselves or something like that, or family or something like that, but.
And I don't know if we can, if it's in the purview of the town to say, well, here's the names that we accept, take them in order. In some ways, I guess that would be nice, keep a much better system.
And then, there was something that I found, and then the subdivision, appendices also includes the list of scenic designated roads. That was, discussed that.
Yep.
We probably should polish that up a little bit, right?
Yes, Yeah, cause that's the one where I think scenic, or the roads are right, the maps are wrong.
In the list in the subdivision regs?
And then obviously anywhere in the, anywhere within the bodies of these documents that list, references the appendix.
And then, this one was interesting, I didn't know if you knew this. In the subdivision regs, it mentions, it references a list of recommended street trees supposed to live in the site plan review regulations. Did you guys ever have that? A list of recommended street trees?
Have you ever looked into
Bueller?
that?
So we don't list the scenic roads out, that appendix missing from, site plan, isn't it?
It's not in site plan, it's only in subdivision.
Okay.
But you said the list is correct, the map is incorrect.
That's my understanding, yes.
And you're saying the list in the subdivision regs is correct? Because the list doesn't live
No,
anywhere
the-
else, correct?
Yes, the list of roads is correct, the tax maps, those aren't tax maps, those are 911 maps.
Quite a lot of lists.
I feel like I saw these somewhere, correct, or maybe it's already been updated. The tax maps up now, so, but again, I think as part of pulling that out, we would just make sure that those are accurate.
Yeah, it's got the tax map number.
Right, we came across this with, recently on an application where we
Oh,
thought
the
it
tax
was-
map references,
but it
yeah,
was
yeah,
actually
yeah,
wrong.
all right, that's, I remember that, yeah.
Or, Priest, I think. Okay, so is there, my only hesitancy about pulling them out is it's one more place that people have to go search for as opposed to having it in the same document. But most of the time, if people are looking at these online, it's just quick and it makes it a lot easier as a process for everybody to, update the appendices versus the.
Yeah, my suggestion is if we pull them out, we create it as a reference document, and then in the very beginning of the subdivision and the site plan, you, list the reference documents.
Yep.
Right, that's like standard, like, so then they're right up there up front, and
Oh, what, the table of contents?
almost like, maybe it's the table of contents, and then there's a separate reference documents.
Yeah, it'd be probably at the end,
Of the table of contents.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Is there any, further discussion on this part for tonight? And we'll move on to the next item, map updates E911. I think we kinda just covered some of that.
Yeah, right.
Oh, Matt, no, I'm sorry, we didn't, I'm guessing what this might, we covered part of it, the other part would be map updates. Our town printed maps that we had SRPC print a number of years ago. Some of those may need to be reprinted and updated.
Just to have
I
updated
will-
versions?
Correct, that have the correct references to them. So, some of this is probably not to do tonight, because I know a couple of the roads are still in question, I think Lamprey and another one. But once those are solidified, so the spurs have their own names, reprint at least some of the maps that would be appropriate to reflect that.
And how does that get updated? Do you guys send
We
information?
usually make a request to SRPC to
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
print new maps, and we specify what, SRPC has all these maps. that are-
Printing them is one thing, I'm talking about physically updating it,
Yeah.
like putting those new names on there.
Yeah.
Is that something we do annually, or is that something we do on own request?
No, I have no idea, we haven't done it.
I guess the question is, what SRPC, do you guys just like, I wonder if, does SRPC do?
Well, so I thought that, I remember, so I've only been here since October, right? And I thought somewhere around the beginning of the new year, Jackson from the, the GIS guy reaches out to all the different, communities and says, what were your subdivisions from last year that created new roads, and then he would add those in. I thought that was part of the process, like an annual thing is that not?
I don't know.
Alright, so I'll go find that out.
I know that Kelly, works on office, she handles assessment and all that stuff.
Yeah.
She does that kind of coordination, so if something goes to like the registry,
outside of us.
it'll come to, she'll get notified, and then somehow she notifies GIS.
Yeah, but I don't think they're doing it in real time, I think he's doing,
No, she always says that they're behind, cause she always tells people, for like even a butter information and stuff, you can't rely on the GIS maps, cause they are,
yeah.
there's a time.
I think there's like a solid year delay in that it's done once a year. I don't think it's done by Jackson year,
There's always a disclaimer too when you go on to GIS for that stuff too.
I can ask her just kinda offhandedly, say, I'll back, and they are.
So I think this is, we'll keep it, now we just talked about it, as a fresh thing, so that once we hear from the select board, some of that moves forward with, the E911 changes, and we get, to a point where we think we're done with them for a little while, we can then, work with SRPC to see what maps we might need, and what ones would be updated, and we'll figure out the process at that point.
Okay.
That's my suggestion. Open to more.
Sounds good.
Before we move on, are you good with that? I had something on maps.
Yep.
Alright, so one of the questions I wanted to, ask and to get clarity on is, what regulatory maps do we have? So, we have our zoning map, right? But then on top of that, we have like these overlay districts, and you have them as their own separate maps. So you have aquifer protection, wetland conservation, flood hazard, wireless communication, stream protection. Is that it?
Pictures on the wall when you walk down, and that's all those maps.
We have a lot of
too.
maps. We have
We have a lot of
a
maps.
dozen or more. So they're on our website, and they're like, if you go to about, there's a maps
Uh-huh.
section. So some of those may not have maps yet, but I know the newest one, I think, that was updated was the aquifers. We realized it was actually part of another one, but it was missing, I think. That was years ago, though. So there you go, there's a bunch of our maps. And all those, I think all these exist on the walls within this
There's 20 there.
department, this
So
building.
click on that aquifer protection one,
Yeah.
Kevin, the bottom middle.
So I reference this page a lot when looking at items. It helps with like some of the historic cemeteries and things like that that may not show on a plan anymore, like, because
And one thing
they're
too,
not a cemetery, they're
Yeah.
field stones, and you don't even know that that's.
what we're talking about GIS though, is if it gets to the point where SRPC is like, oh, what you guys are asking for might require funds. One thing too is that sometimes, some towns, I think it probably depends on what the contract is that SRPC has with the town, is their their online GIS
Yeah.
will have these overlays. And I think unless you build it in, this is the only place it lives.
Yeah. Right.
So something to consider, if we end up in a scenario where we need to update some elements of the GIS and there's a fee component to it, you might as well do it once and tackle a couple items.
Yep. Well, I feel like, I thought we had like a certain amount within our contract or whatever from years past, where we had a certain number of maps, updates that could be done, within reason. Or we had a fee but it's included in we have our budget to.
I mean, the thing about, I mean, this is,
That's the SRPC logo, right?
Yeah, all these were printed.
Yeah.
that's our whole one, yeah. Okay.
I'll see you need to update it because your logo's old, that's on cost on the surface.
I mean, there's a difference between, an informational map and a regulatory map,
Right.
obviously. And when I was looking for our aquifer map and our, wireless communication maps and stream protection maps, because I have to determine if a project is in there, these were not, I didn't know that this section existed.
Yeah, and it's not easy necessarily, because I don't know.
About maps, I mean,
Some of these I think exist within like Granite View the website, as a layer, you know, might be called something different though. You know, that's how I generally can see, cause yes, trying to get this, if it's not on our assessing page, as a layer, which this one wouldn't be, it can be tough to see like, is this parcel in the aquifer protection zone or is it not? You know, when it seems like it is, then it applies.
Right, oh, that answers that question.
All right, to move on. That one, okay. Defining impervious, this is was one of my pieces. I looked up a number of different towns. I think a lot of towns use the same kind of verbiage. It seems like they just kind of copied each other. What I recommend, I really like Durham, New Hampshire's, definition of impervious. So basically, a lot of towns, I'll read it quickly, had a pretty basic definition, or they may go into a different section. Impervious surface, any modified surface that cannot effectively absorb or infiltrate water. Impervious surface includes, but are not limited to, roofs, paved areas such as driveways, parking areas, walkways. Impervious surfaces also include decks, patios, gravel, or crushed stone surfaces, unless such structures or surfaces have been designed to effectively absorb or infiltrate water. That's Portsmouth. Durham, on the other hand, defines impervious surface. Then they also define impervious surface area, so it gives you an idea of how to calculate that. And then impervious surface ratio, which is the surface area of a site or parcel divided by the total area of the site or parcel expressed as a percentage. So that goes back to when everywhere in our area, in our zoning, we might talk about, you know, so in the commercial industrial zone, maximum lot coverage is 50%, 40% in the town district. We don't have anything specified in the residential agricultural district. Aquifer protection district specifically says 10% impervious. So we say maximum lot coverage in some areas, impervious in other areas. So this again would be a definition update. We can add it into the subdivision site plan regs initially. It probably also would be a zoning update at some point to amend that language. So, because right now we don't define very clearly impervious. We don't define it at all, so you know, if something gets appealed, if we apply a specific definition that we think it means, it goes to court. If we don't have it defined, generally they'll open up a dictionary, look up the definition of impervious, which I should have done, and apply that. Or, you know, that's similar for other parts of zoning as well. You know, if you don't define it, judges will interpret it based on the general definition of a term.
Are we trying to find it differently?
We just don't have a definition of impervious. We talk about impervious surfaces, but we don't define it. So where I'm getting at with
Are
this,
we using it, well, again, since we don't have, that's the specific one we're talking about. Are we just gonna get it out of the dictionary and throw it in?
that's one method, and that might be where these are getting at. So what I'm getting at is there's certain lots in town where I think everybody's clear, a building, a roof, impervious. You know, it's not, water landing on it, it's not gonna soak in unless it's a living roof. It's gonna run off, has to be addressed. But other areas, like severely, like a driveway, again, impervious if it's paved, unless it's pervious pavement, which is pretty rare. Or, you know, even compacted crushed stone generally will act as an impervious surface. You know, it's not gonna infiltrate water if the fines are still in there.
Must be clean stone for it to be
You know,
counted.
or highly compacted sand, again, same thing, the water's gonna run off a bit. So when you're looking at the total of an area, you wanna make sure that we're clear as to what we're measuring for ourselves and for the applicant and for the building inspector as to what they're looking at for a measurement.
Terms of definition.
Yeah, so Durham, had the three, so it just kinda gave an idea, it clarifies how to calculate it, but was similar to those others, just a little more language. A material with low permeability that impedes the natural infiltration of moisture to the ground, so that the majority of the precipitation that falls on the surface runs off or is not absorbed into the ground. Common impervious surfaces include, but are not limited to roofs, concrete, or bituminous paving. gives an idea of those. Storage areas, compacted gravel, including drives and parking areas, oiled or compacted earthen materials, stone, concrete, composite pavers, wood, swimming pools.
That's what I think that definition makes it fairly clear within the definition if somebody, it's not vague, it's very, pretty much everything that they list will be covered, or cover everything we would see in town.
So what I can do is, as we go through this, I can I'll email to Kevin, he can distribute with other stuff as we go, so that we're not getting overwhelmed with a bunch of things, separate pieces, but, those three pieces, the language, and then we can decide if we wanna add it into site plan and subdivision regs. Again, I think those are generally the areas that we're more probably concerned with, generally residential lot, unless it's a very small, pre-existing non-conforming lot. Ideally, you're probably not gonna see, 50%, 60%, 70% of it being a impervious surface. Can it happen? Sure. But I think where I would be more concerned with these types of things happening at this time are larger things, so a major subdivision coming in, major commercial space, change, industrial space, something like that, where, because generally those are gonna be much larger acreage. And the total impervious area, quantifying it, saying how you measure it, accounting for it with, drainage and erosion and everything else.
So you'll send that out to
Yep.
Kevin, Tracy, Leslie.
And then again, as we look at zoning later on, we'll probably make sure that we catch it everywhere, because in some areas again, zoning talks about maximum lot coverage. I don't think we necessarily define what that is, what, that's, just a building, or if it's also driveways and things like that. I will send that over.
And didn't we talk about pulling out the definitions too, and creating a separate definition?
I think.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up in the last conversation with the appendices, cause it does, definitions exist in all three documents. And I haven't gone through it, but I have to imagine there's inconsistencies.
At some point, we took one of them as a master, found terms that were missing, added them in, and then adopted it across all of them, is my understanding, if I remember correctly.
Staff worked on that.
Hopefully it'll be
Yeah.
kind more.
So that was a big part of when we updated the site plan regs, the subdivision regs, so we did zoning first, and then we did those other two afterwards, and we tried to make them, the numbering and the format of them all match. We did the definition section at that time,
We added a lot of definitions, wasn't it a couple of years ago?
so that, I could see us,
So was it about 5 years ago? I think it was on the,
When Paul did most of the legwork on that.
I could see us pulling definitions out of site plan and subdivision, because those are more amendable more easily. But if we pull it out of zoning and then we add a definition, or we change a definition that becomes substantive, did we just create a zoning amendment that we didn't intend without a warrant article?
Yeah, I agree, and you probably need it, to be in the zoning ordinance, so you could do it by reference, site plan review or something. Or, just keep going through the site plan review and subdivision just to see if there's some inconsistencies. See if there's something missing. I do think you need them one, I don't think you can pull them all out. Pull it out of all three.
Yep. So for now, I think, my opinion is that we leave them
In the three different regs.
but, again, conversation on that with everybody.
One of the decisions I would make is that, or two, I mentioned this before, is try to minimize legislating through definitions. There are definitely places where that exists, and we should do everything we can. Definitions are there to clarify meaning, not to, you know, if you define what a common driveway is, you shouldn't also say, and it should be 10 feet off of a setback, right? Really remove them. The other thing too is that there's a lot of, like, if you added a new section, like open space development, you added definitions, but you kept it in the open space development section instead of moving it down, those definitions into the definitions section. So that might be a change worth doing down the road, is going through your zoning ordinance and see if there's places where you have like floating definitions and just relocate. I'm not saying change them, just relocate where they live and put them in the definitions.
Building envelope or lot envelope, one of them in the definition is one that says the 30,000 or 200 by 200.
Yes, oh, right, yes, you're absolutely right, yeah.
It's one I'm always hunting for, and it's always at the back of, and that's why I think why people miss it sometimes too.
I mean, it would be nice to do all of our dimensions in a section of the zoning ordinance as tables.
I agree. That's something we should strive for. But,
Life goals, right?
yes. The only other thing, again, as we continue looking forward, another meeting would be zoning amendments. Keep slopes ordinance on the horizon to think about. We need to come up with better verbiage for that. That's not the road for tonight, though. Oh, subregs 16.8, other required permits. That seems to be like referencing alteration of terrain permits. I didn't know if we should actually call that out as such and then add any verbiage as we do this, to give clarity, like that's.
The RSA requires it's alteration, it requires a alteration of terrain permit from, and that RSA hasn't changed.
Yeah, so I don't know if this verbiage is complete, or if we should say, you know, within, you know, like, it's within like total cumulative disturbance within 10 years applies towards that,
What are you looking at?
or in certain situations.
16.8,
The subdivision?
yeah.
Sure, sounds great.
Other required permits.
So that seems like it's specifically referencing an alteration of terrain permit. Maybe we should,
That's what that is, that RSA is
that
the
name.
requirement for an alteration of terrain permit.
and then also, if there's additional verbiage to put in here, when this may apply, you know, it's just to guide the board that it's more than 100,000 contiguous square feet. But it's also, that's within cumulative within 10 years,
Yeah, so you could,
and
yeah,
also 25.
within like 3 sentences, you could clarify for the board how to review, because in many cases, if you have a project that somebody expands a product within 5 years, unless somebody at the planning board level catches, hey, this might trigger in terms of disturbance, state can't always pick up on that, and it might trigger the 100,000 within 10 years, and then that requires an alteration of terrain, which obviously brings a different level of design, but.
And it's in, site plan regs, it's 15.8. So we don't have to go through all that tonight, but I think, and I can look at that,
I think
Next time.
yeah, we can come up with a
to figure out what the.
3-sentence summary.
Cause I think there's 2 or 3 conditions where that may apply, an alteration of terrain may apply, and if we're gonna put it in there, I think it makes sense to actually have the right language. Okay.
Benefits the board in the future, yeah.
Any, before we move on to item number 3 of our agenda for tonight, any further, items that we didn't address on this list that anybody would like to bring up?
I'm just gonna mention something.
Oh.
That we were emailing back and forth, and you said you bring it up, so I'll bring it up. It's just that setback, industrial, like the, definition of setback,
a definition
I
for,
don't
s-
want you to get into it,
Sorry, well,
that when,
Yes.
we emailed back and forth with you and Dale, and they're involved, regarding definition of setback, how it's being interpreted by the building inspector.
we can, I think we can talk about that. I'd be hesitant to take a vote on it, but if we keep it non-case specific,
Right.
basically, the building inspector inquired as to setbacks for, say, the commercial residential zone. It could be all zones. Whether it's applied to just the right of way to the building, or if it's to the property line to the building, or, would it include, say, like, a parking lot? So,
as in the setback applies to pavement.
parking lot, right, improved services, any kind of improvement, I guess, or. So if you look at our zoning ordinance, you know, it would say that on there that it's, like in the residential agricultural, it specifically says, to the front of a building or whatever.
Yeah, distance
Other areas
between
it's
the
called a
street right
setback,
of way and
But
front
the
line.
definition of setback itself was where that further question is coming for the building inspector. Feels that pertains, the way our definition is currently written, that the setback would apply just to the building. So a driveway, or a parking lot, some other structure, something else could go, well, you know, much closer to a line, a lot line.
And that's true, but that's where currently, like in the site plan, the landscaping requirements for
So
a
there's-
buffer then control,
Yeah, and those would be less restrictive, so those would be.
correct?
Yeah.
Are you asking for our opinion right now, of what we think it should mean? Or are you asking us to have a discussion on what it could possibly mean?
Well, my suggestion was that
To me, it's
if
a
there's
building,
any,
is the setback.
if there's any case-specific thing, encourage them to come in for conceptual or design review, allows for the board to actually have discussion case-specific, and have more of a formal opinion. At this point, this is not case-specific, it's trying to give the building inspector guidance,
So
For the future.
I deal with them all the time, and I hear,
Yeah.
I use it for, so what his interpretation of the setback is, ain't the mandate, probably, I said it earlier tonight. Now, the him mandate, not a driveway a little bit, parking area, apron around the building. You know, that kind of stuff, not clearly decks and buildings, yes, but his interpretation always, that, you can't have the parking area
You can't build a parking lot, yeah, I
inside
see,
of
yeah.
100-foot setback.
I think based on our zoning definition, it just says building. But I think, that's where it comes into our buffer discussions with landscaping. A lot of towns will do a parking setback. Granted, that's usually towns with more of a commercially
I think
focused.
that would be helpful, so for him, cause he's gotta make the call, like, come in and, he can't have everyone just come in front of the board and say, well, wow, you guys, he's gotta make the call on these things. Sometimes on the spot or something.
yeah, so it's gonna require a site plan or subdivision application.
Relatively true.
For any of those, again, there's other areas that aren't necessarily called setbacks, but there's buffer and reserve stretch and vegetated strips and vegetation buffers and things like that, where that might apply. But I guess, yeah, hearing the building inspector's thoughts on it and rereading the zoning ordinance, I think the way we currently have it written doesn't preclude, parking lot from being placed within a buffer.
So this is, and you might want 13.10 of the site plan,
That's only for business parking lot.
look at, what, the 100-foot?
Parking lot.
Yes.
Yeah, so in our site plan regulations, 13.10, subsection 3, design considerations, so this subsection is for off-street parking and loading, says, no paving, parking, loading area, or storage shall be permitted within 20 feet of any side or rear property line.
Okay.
So maybe that's gonna kinda,
That, it's helpful, although he does go off his EOs, he goes off his zoning, so.
right, but in theory, if something he's being consulted on is going to require permitting, they're gonna have to follow that anyway.
Right.
Yeah, but from a zoning perspective, it's building, that's what our setback clearly says, front line of a right of way to the front line of a building.
There are times, and I'm not gonna get specific, but there are times we have conversations that are impromptu, where things do hang in on those conversations, so he has to be able to, and myself, if he's not there, I gotta help the conversation.
Yeah.
To guide people, and sometimes it can, have, big questions, I don't know.
I guess it's gonna depend on where the site is in conjunction with abutting properties. Because again, the section that Mr. McKinnon just referenced, 13.10, off-street parking and loading, the very first part talks about such facilities shall be designed to ensure safety and convenience, but they shall also minimize the impact of intrusive elements, loading, noise, dust, glare on neighboring properties, and land uses. So I guess that's where the interpretation comes in. So if it's, if it's in our commercial zone and it's Route 4, in the abutting property, on the front is Route 4, that's one thing, but if it's somehow outside of that, and the abutting properties are all residential,
So to make our life
or it
slightly
could
easier,
have more stringent
you
requirements.
guys feel it's building and not parking lot for the instance off of Route 4.
In the commercial zone.
In
So,
a commercial,
yeah,
well, that's an
that is, yeah. I mean, yeah, from our zoning ordinance, those setbacks are only to the building. If it's a project requiring site plan, there's 2 or 3 instances that will then define if you start getting granular with parking lots, driveway aprons, or aprons around a building.
A lot of times we caveat when we're talking to people, we say, we can't speak for the board, however,
The board may-
Those are all the answers they would get, like a design review.
yeah, well, this
Yeah.
is something you can consider, but as soon as they hear that, then they're right away like, wow, that's what the board would know, so. As long as, that's all, that's conversation.
But that may be a future consideration, is limiting how close a non-structured improvement can be in the frontage area. Do you want parking right up to
I think that's what I think I had on, is no cut, no disturb buffers, but I think that's another update to our definition of setbacks or clarity we probably wanna make is
This is all for industrial zone.
commercial.
Primarily, commercial, industrial.
Yeah, I get it.
Similar
Yes,
to the driveways
but-
being off the
So,
boundary.
so is the town desire to have a specific look for things, meaning in the Route 4 corridor, yes, it's commercial, but parking is kind of behind structures so that, instead of large parking lots, or is it fine because it's the commercial zone? For that zone, and then anywhere else,
You looking for an opinion right now from us?
I think it's a good time to have a non-binding, opinion if you wanna give one, nobody's required to give one, it's not binding. It's again, direction for the building inspector, understand what the board.
I think for visibility, safety, and every reason, people want their parking to be in front of the building. Or going by or like this, that you see the parking lots there. You don't go down into these, dollar having their parking in the backyard, in the back of their building, it's always in the front.
I think the question can become, how close do you want it to the property line? Do you want it right up to the property line, or do you want there to be, the building has to be set back 50 feet, the parking lot should be set back 20 feet?
Yeah, and I think we have that as well. We don't-
Definition, we want the dimensions.
And that's why I said, like we have, the driveways need to be off the boundary.
10 feet.
So we have that, but we don't have anything for per se for parking lots,
Yeah,
or is it the same?
Sounds like there's something in the site regulation. I think that would, very,
well, I think for the immediate
yes.
interpretation is that it appears that parking is allowed in frontage. But if you are coming in under site plan review, you might be held to a standard that says
Something else.
it can be waived, obviously, the board has a choice to waive that, but.
Well, it's also things to consider, so on the site, if somebody's gonna put curbing 2 feet off of the front right-of-way line on Route 4, and we review a site, well, we can't, in good conscience, approve, say, snow storage pushing into the state right-of-way, cause then the DOT's gonna yell at us, so then it's like, we're gonna request that it's moved back, because you can't keep your development on your property year-round. So it's kind of,
Yeah,
the site plan calls out side and rear, and I guess best design practice for the front.
I honestly didn't call out the front.
Yeah, I don't know. It's,
Thought-
I don't know what the intent was
this
there.
is probably a call from another town, to be
Yeah.
honest, so.
Yeah, what crazy town was that?
It is changeable though, it's in the site plan
Yeah,
regulations.
right.
Alright, this time of night where we reserve public comment, if you have questions non-specific to an application or property, you can come in and ask us. We encourage you to come in if you have planning board related questions. Nobody's here tonight, so I'll move on. I'll just do select board, staff board, member updates, but I'll just, start with Ms. Jones if you have any items that you'd like to update.
I will not be here for the next meeting in September. I'll be away on vacation. I think I told everyone that last time, but
For September?
Pardon?
What date, the September first?
At the
Sixth?
14th, I'll be
September
here
14th.
for the 28th.
Okay,
I won't
yep.
be here for the 14th.
Perfect, okay, thank you. Ms. Davies?
I just have a question about the, what's going on at the West Nottingham International Airport. How come that's never come before the board? The big new building that's sitting in the old runway.
I can inquire as to the building inspector, on that. I'm happy to.
Buzz, you beat me to it.
Really? You were gonna ask that?
I drove by it this morning, and boom!
I believe,
Well, he met all the setbacks, and he did everything, what they wouldn't come
I
across.
believe there were, again, I don't wanna get case specific, but I believe whatever was originally occurring there had permits and everything else, appropriate for the zone, but I will reach out to the,
I would be curious to see what the inquiry is, because I think there's
yeah.
some there's figures in my head that I'm wondering triggered some things, so.
I will reach out to the building inspector again, I don't wanna have too much discussion on it in case something does come before us, but I will reach out specifically again.
The only comment I had tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
I know, there was discussion about the Route 4 and different things about Route 4 generally, so I heard from, I always forget his name, SRPC, Colin was talking about the corridor study that's happening, and so Barrington and Northwood, I believe, are involved in that, so.
Yeah, that was, I was gonna tee onto that, but, so when we as a board had decided to request a corridor study, I'd sent a letter to, well, I had corresponded with Northwood, Barrington, and Lee, planning boards, and SRPC to see, would there be support, and can we all generate letters to the DOT? I did send that letter out, and emailed to the DOT, we got a response, actually, I just got it, I think, yesterday or today, from, Bill Watson, who's the New Hampshire DOT Bureau of Planning Community Assistance, administrator, or an administrator, but basically saying that this would fit, the department, through the 10-year plan, has funding to develop corridor studies for priority corridors throughout the state. They are in the beginning stages of this program, and currently the hired consultant that is supporting us is developing the criteria for prioritizing many corridors, which have been identified as priorities. US 4 will be included in that effort as part of the program. submitted letter has been provided to William Rose, the DOT project manager, to share with the consultant. Beyond that, it's important to point out that there is a 10-year plan process. There are many additional discretionary programs approved as part of a recent federal transportation legislation. Some programs have guidance and direction developed, many do not yet, and we are all eagerly awaiting the feds to issue information. We requested that we continue to make our needs known through SRPC and DOT. That's it. So basically, we heard you. It's gonna be included in the list that we consider. I have been at the Stratford Regional Planning Commission's meeting last week, talking about, housing, needs, and, I met the town administrator, I think it was, for, Durham, sent him a copy of the letter as well. He's gonna present it to the boards there to see if, he thought that maybe they'd wanna be included in that corridor study as well. So basically, it sounds like there's general consensus. Hopefully the towns follow up. The more voices that request it, the more likely it is that it's gonna happen. You call them part of that.
It was a nice weekend. If anybody made it up to the town square, saw a nice 300 enactments. There's a lot of stuff going on for the 300th. Fire department's having a chowder thing. There's the old time baseball game still coming up. So just pay attention if you got the free time to go. It's worth the time to go see. A lot of effort was put into that. For the Board of Selectmen's meetings, we basically had conversation with the Lake Association about funding, that they needed some money, to help pay for their Lake House program, which, we granted because the money was already there. They went over CIP things for coming up, cause we're getting budgetary's gonna be important this year with what we have. There was also a message from our new town moderator that, we are looking for, more ballot clerks, different parties, Democrat, Republican, undeclared, to help out, so that we have a broader span, instead of more of one side than the other. So if you're interested, it's a good way to meet people, it's a fun way to spend the day, and, that's pretty much what's going on right now.
I think there's some compensation for that too, right? Those positions? They get like a stipend or something?
Yes, there is a stipend that's
Fee?
there for that.
So another reason.
I would say it's a lot, but you do get some, do it for more the moral value of us, like doing something good.
It's an hourly rate.
Any individual I know that's volunteered for it is always spoken very highly of the process. And
Yeah.
the camaraderie on both sides that occurs at the events.
And that's, again, we're preparing for budget season.
Mr. McKinnon?
Nothing, Buzz actually beat me to my request for an inquiry, but, I am planning to be here for the September 14th meeting. My wife and I are expecting our second later in September. No saying when he'll come, so don't expect me for the second one, but
Congratulations on that.
thank you, so. I don't know if I wanna miss the first meeting in September. Kevin's vaguely making it sound like it's gonna be fun, so.
Same old, same old.
I'll tell her to consider that.
So a reminder that we have a site walk scheduled for a week from today, August 31st on Moores Road at 5:45 PM. Parking again is gonna be in the left-hand side. There's a current lot there with a barn, I believe, and should have plenty of parking, as Moores Road likely does not. So please, give yourself time, dress appropriately. It's a large lot with, depending on what the conditions are that day. Boots might be a good idea.
Boots would probably be a good idea.
I touched upon the workshop I went to last week with Stratford Regional Planning Commission, Milton, Lee, Rollinsford, Durham, us, I can't remember, there might have been another town or two that were involved, in the session that I was at, talking about what communities can do to, look at housing. A lot of it's, again, affordable housing and how to ensure that there's a blend, for all residents. Some of the common themes were, if you incentivize workforce housing, we have an incentive in our open space development for workforce housing. is it sufficient to actually make it cost effective for a developer, you know, is it actually enough of incentive monetarily, basically, to make it work? My thoughts on that in a town like ours is it's very difficult when individual house lots, thinking of the 204 common shared driveway in front of the condos, sold for over $600,000 a piece. So if that's what an individual house is going for, right on a very busy roadway with a shared driveway, how could you incentivize development necessarily to, yeah, so, you know, I mentioned, I guess like in cities, they look at, instead of, like, we look at dwelling units per parcel, you know, so, single family, that's one dwelling unit, you need X square, you know, 30,000 square feet of buildable area, and 2 acres. You go up from there, but you could put a 10,000 square foot house on that, or 20,000 square foot house. You're not limited. So do you look at floor area or, you know, some other calculation? Again, I don't think we're gonna tackle this as our community anytime very soon. It would take a lot of looking, a lot of consideration and amendments. But again, and also a community like ours, you know, no town water, no town sewer, we're 20 minutes to the nearest hospital. That precludes a lot of like 55 plus or senior housing or assisted living types of things, because we're too far from those things. So you have individual limitations of a community. So it's a problem, and right now, it seems like the cities are mostly addressing it. You know, they have the resources, they have the capacity. Dover's adding
They
more.
give density bonuses,
density.
stuff like that, yeah.
Correct, and then lastly, as part of that, like you see towns like Dover doing, transfer of land rights, is that what it's called? Transfer of, so,
Transfer of development rights?
yeah, so
Yeah.
there's 2 different ways that I know of that could be done. One is, so a developer has, say, land out on the fringe of Nottingham, and they wanna do a development that's closer to town center, that they may get a bonus, because keeping things closer together avoids that sprawl, avoids the increase in the sort of resources of fire and police outside the central area. And then they would give up the development rights of the land further out, so you kind of lock up land that's, you know, on the outskirts while keeping the development closer, so you kind of eliminate that sprawl.
Doesn't necessarily make it conservation land or something, it actually makes that a non-buildable piece.
That's my understanding. Some communities do it as a fund instead, they charge a fee. And they keep a reserve fund, for transfer development rights, and then they use that when bigger parcels come up, so like, cause again, if it's, you may get this parcel that's not that great, doesn't have a lot of value to it in some ways, but that's what you accept, whereas with a fund, you know, you might be able to get those larger parcels that really would have a huge impact to the town, you know, 100 acre, 200 acre, 300 acre, larger, and they, you know, with the fund, they get it, and then do it that way. So I don't think we're there either, but it's something to think about, consider, and always look at down the road. Last couple things, just a reminder, if you haven't read the changes to planning and zoning laws in 2022, that email, I think Blair had sent out, or Kevin sent out, you should probably resend it, just read it, because some of these are live as of August 23rd, so yesterday. Publication of fees, training, writing of findings, that's a huge one for us, timelines, so take a look at those, please, because we gotta make sure that any motions we make are in line with that.
What are those trainings?
It was a email that had a link from, NHMA that says, it was changes to planning and zoning laws of 2022 for municipalities, and we can resend it. Just to make sure that we get that, but again, we just wanna make sure that we're in line, because those are pretty significant for this year, more than past years.
And where is this? Where is it online?
Kevin will email it again, he'll send it out fresh.
Okay, you sent it to me, or?
I sent it to everyone.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yep. And that's all I have.
I apologize for not being here for a while, last time we were in session. So I will be here from now on. Yeah, it was just, I guess all my questions have been answered. Just wondering what's going on on the other side of town and on both sides of the road. Go to the end of this road, take a right,
You mean 125?
125.
Oh.
125, oh.
There's currently no approvals on the land.
What is it?
Currently no approvals on the land, they just removed the trees. They're working through the planning process.
Is that in Nottingham? No.
Epping.
So it's potential if it's something,
There's an approval on east side, that you see them pushing dirt.
One side is gonna be commercial, the other side is gonna be residential.
I believe, yeah, I think the side you see them pushing some dirt on where 87 ties in, whatever that road is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that's some degree of a residential project. Commercial on the other side where they cleared more trees.
well, hopefully we were granted a butter status if it's gonna be impacting the town.
I don't know if any of you, I know it's in the planning process.
Yeah,
from-
anytime, so, yeah, and one thing, in general with the town, you can see like if, as a select board approves like intent to cut permits, oftentimes, not always, but a lot of times if it's a larger parcel, intent to cut comes in and then potential development comes in. That one's outside of us, so check Epping's pages to see what's on that one. And that's a good reminder, thank you for the other part too, and congratulations on the new job. Just a reminder to everybody, if you think you're not gonna be able to make a meeting or anything, please just send it to, myself and Mr. McKinnon and the land use clerk if you can. Make sure that one of us is aware, so we can just try to make sure we're gonna have a quorum, present. I know things come up, and sometimes it's last minute, so all of us just, please, communicate it so that we know.
I got nothing.
Gene?
Just wanted to, make sure everybody's aware, if you didn't already know. It appears, and I feel 99% certain that this is the case, is that the project that we just voted on for a DRI, the Morse Road, will actually have to go before Raymond for planning board approval. In addition to this planning board, they will only be going to them for transportation and access. They don't have a sole access to that property as they're proposing to develop it that comes through Nottingham. You have to go through Moores Road, or Imson Trail, whatever that. Jamson, thank you, sorry. Jamson Trail, both of which start off of Mountain Road in Raymond. There is a road that touches on it, but they're not proposing, Saks Road, they're not proposing to use that, therefore.
Property doesn't go over there, I don't think.
What's that?
I think his property line goes there.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. It looks really close, but either way, they're not proposing to use it. So,
So as proposed, it has to go through another,
yeah, and I was emailing with the me at Rockingham, Regional Planning Commission, and she said that the town has reached out to them and they're working on getting them on an agenda, so they appear to agree with me for, yeah, that interpretation. So that'll just be something to just like keep in the back of your mind, and it'll be a condition of our approval,
Okay,
most
so,
likely.
so Blair, do they go to Raymond first, or do they come here, is it?
Our understanding is,
Simultaneous?
yeah, our understanding is that it could be concurrent, it would just be a condition of approval for here, like,
Got it.
you're approved, you know, you're blessed, but you do need the approval over there. Chances are the approval with them will happen before here, even though they're a little behind, but it's more complex over here. That being said, who knows?
and one thing before we get to stuff, before I forget, we had a non-public session at the last meeting. We did not take a motion on sealing the minutes. We should do that, tonight, so before we, forget. So that was a non-public session that we had held on August 10th. So I think the motion would be simply a motion to seal the minutes, non-public, session minutes.
Want it now?
August 10th. Huh?
You want it now?
I would entertain one now, yes.
I'll make a motion that we seal the non-public, minutes from August tenth, 2020.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Anderson, second by Mr. McKinnon,
I have a question before we vote.
of course.
Are we gonna still have access to the minutes?
We, as a board, would yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. It just, if they get distributed beyond the board, same thing with like town council advice, it becomes, you know. So for these, we'll do a roll call vote, I'll go around.
Which of us should vote?
I see to Mr. Davies.
Okay,
Mr. Davies,
Aye.
Mr. Anderson,
Aye.
Mr. Moran.
Aye.
Mr. McKinnon.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Jones? I mean,
okay.
okay, so, abstain, I mean.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 6-0-1. And I apologize, that's, we go into non-public so infrequently, it's my fault, as the chair. That should be a roll call to enter, roll call to exit, roll call to seal the minutes.
All of our faults, we all
Right
should
at,
know.
right at the,
Yeah.
right during that meeting.
Should've known.
We all should know.
But the minutes should be sealed the same night. Procedural, we're there, so now we know.
A couple things, I have a few Mylars that need to be signed, Bergeron again, we did sign his, but I got kicked back because it's too small from the registry, so, Roger one, he didn't sign, he has to sign that. I did receive the Mylar today, from, Shay, there's just so many conditions, I haven't had a chance to cross-check any of that, so. I won't sign that one today. And then just to give you guys a heads up on the next meeting, you have your packets in front of you, so when I can do this, this will be the procedure, this makes more sense. Three new cases coming up, and then we've got two that have been continued, so, business as usual.
Busy me.
I can reach out to town administrator again if it seems like any of those have a lot of interest in them, to see if we can get them to do it again.
I think it's worth it.
It's probably worth it.
One's gonna be the Stevens Hill, which, was designed not too long ago, so I would imagine that one would be. that's
So we
of
should accept,
interest.
yeah.
And, one was another smaller subdivision, that change of use. That's what I was referencing when I talked about someone had done some hand drawing stuff. If you guys feel like that doesn't suffice, let me know. There is an old site plan, on file. You guys will probably be familiar, you guys, folks who've been on the board for a bit, probably be familiar with the property. I can pull that old site review if you want to use something to help decide where like parking and that kind of stuff is. It helps.
We have a file, probably worth it.
But I
If
did
we have a
tell-
prior approved site plan, or that's germane to an application, I think it's helpful.
Yeah, which I'll get that out to you guys, and it's in lieu of having the applicant necessarily have to hire someone to do all the drawings and
It's better than usually what we expect for change of use.
stuff. I think it's how it pairs nicely with this, so it's kind of, the big thing for this is a retail, venture, and clearly parking is the concern with that stuff, and the old site review kind of helped us, they kind of outline nicely, better than what you do with the
I think it's worth sharing that if we have it, yeah.
But if you guys feel like you need more, he's gonna have to hire someone, let me know, and I told him I would get back with him and kind of discuss it with him.
Can we even, we have to wait?
Okay, fair enough.
I think if they presented it, I think we have to go with what they've given us.
Okay, fair enough. I think you'll appreciate it. And I'll get that out to you guys as soon as I can figure out which one's the couple of them, but
Yeah.
I'll get something out. I'll get this all out to you electronically.
Sounds good.
I'm gonna leave this up here. Sign when you have them.
We have a couple of sets of minutes, I'm fine with, unless anybody wants to make a motion, I'm gonna be fine with,
Ooh,
To approve, minutes for 7/13, 8/3 site walk.
I'll second. Buzz second.
Got a motion by Mr. Anderson, a second by Mr. Davies, to approve the minutes of July 13th and August 3rd. Any further discussion?
You doing separately? Vote.
Request to be done several, the motions to combine them, so we have to amend the motion, but,
That's fine. Just leave that.
I'd say let's leave it. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Sure, I
Opposed?
trust you.
I was staying because I wasn't on the board at those meetings, so.
Abstain. So, motion carries 5-0 to
Wanna
two
stay here all
abstentions.
night?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought you were
Okay.
opposed to adjourning.
All those in favor
We
to
were not
adjourn,
there yet.
please say aye.
Now we're saying, hey.
Adjourn, thank you, everybody, appreciate it. Long night, but we got a lot of motion.